Computer. Hello, welcome to Jesus TV. This is episode 2 of well, it's kind of like an episode 2. This is part 2 of an episode. So this is like a sub episode of WakeNOsis. And so WakeNOsis part 2. The television program is called Suffer Well, Healed by His Stripes. And so the focus of the television program on Jesus TV is to find ways in our lives, or to explore ways, or to just talk about ways that we can suffer well, because suffer we will. So there's two different ways, basically two main ways to suffer. The devil suffers, and in the scriptures it says that his desire is that others are miserable like unto himself. And so that's one way in which you can suffer, is miserably. And then another way you can suffer is the way that Christ did, and it is a healing suffering. And so in this particular part 2 episode, we'll talk about symbiotic spirit possession. So that term symbiotic will be contrasted with parasitic. So the devil has a relationship with his children, but it is parasitic. It hurts them more and more. Christ's relationship is health giving. That is, it helps them more and more. His intention is for us to suffer only for a moment, or only for a season. In this case, I'm on year 59 of the suffering plan, and I'm hoping 22 years from now I get unplugged from this and I get to enter the spirit world, which will probably have its suffering approximations. That we will always have opposition in all things. Otherwise, we can't have righteousness brought to pass. But it'll be a different kind of opposition. I won't deep dive into it. I just kind of wanted to introduce where you're at. There is an episode 1 of WakeNOsis, but the overall television program is Suffer Well, Healed by His Stripes. And so Jonathan McCormick, a poet that Jesus has been raising up. Well, he's been raising me up too, so that's some flowery language. But he's raised Jonathan McCormick up to help me with his prophetic poems. So you may have heard him on another Jesus TV program called Poetry and Prophecy. So Jonathan has a gift there in his despair. As Jonathan suffers, you know what grows out of him? He's like a tree that has done a lot of suffering, but it'll produce fruits, and they're delicious. And that's what your poems are. Jonathan, why don't you introduce yourself? Any comments you want to make before I dive into any script there? That was my intro for you.
I'm looking forward to this. I don't know. I sent you a link last night by a guy. He's the guy that the main guy, I think. Well, he's got a partner. They do the Bible Project. You know the Bible Project?
Oh, I've heard of that. Yeah. Tell us what it is.
So on YouTube, they've got it's a YouTube channel called the Bible Project, and it's these short animated things, and he's I really like the way he thinks. He's a scholar, and he studied the Bible. That's what he's done for a profession. He's a professor of biblical studies, and the way that he connects things is really helpful. I mean, there's a few things that I have disagreed with, but for the most part, I've liked him. And then he gave a talk, and I sent you a link for it last night, but he talks about, it was funny to hear him because he was saying almost exactly what you were saying, like that God's been showing him that it's like these people, these prophets that had these visions and stuff, what they were doing was experiencing an altered state of consciousness, and that the Garden of Eden is the presence of God. It's it's something that existed and that will exist. And it's like, and we can touch it through prayers and through prayer and um, through the experience, so through an experiential thing that we experience whenever we seek this altered state of consciousness. And at the end of it, I thought it was kind of funny because he was saying one of the things that I've heard you say, like with this WakeNOsis thing. He's like, now don't everybody get upset and saying that I'm getting into Eastern mysticism. He says, but you have to admit though, where was Jesus born? In
Right.
the East.
Yeah, that's right.
Said,
That's a great point, because we forget our hugely Western bias that we just assume. I mean, because we're rolling thunder. I mean, the United States of America and modern Western medicine, we're rolling thunder, baby. We're people are trying to get into our country. They're adopting all the Western ways, and so it's easy to just think, well, we've finally arrived, while dismissing Eastern ways. And the truth is, we are now swinging those who are becoming enlightened. We're swinging to the East. That's what's going on, is we realize we've become imbalanced with our individualism. Individualism has a place to play, but you can take that too far, just like anything, an imbalance. So I like what you're saying. And it's going to touch upon kind of the thing. So one of the things you'll notice, so Jonathan's already watched episode 1 of WakeNOsis, and I want to get his comments. So I'm just going to kind of briefly summarize, because Jesus had me do that. It's interesting. He's had me come back into the episode to study it because he wants it in my mind. And so this is an opportunity for me to do that, and also to get additional feedback, because the last WakeNOsis Part 1, we had Aaron Smith on, and he made some comments and had insights that helped my mind. But I realized he's having me go over this, and it's becoming unusual. Like, well, this is unusual that I'm coming back so directly to this. But he's trying to emphasize it to me, but I think it may be important for other people. So I hope that as we go through this episode, you'll be able to make ties just like Jonathan, because I think God's doing a work here that's quite mysterious, and that should be expected. He's a God of mystery. So if you're not getting surprised often, then maybe you're not getting a whole bunch more Jesus, because normal levels of Jesus aren't too surprising. Go ahead. Yes, Jonathan.
I was just going to say too, one thing that occurred to me last night was this may take a few generations. It's like, I found that, and I think we need to have compassion. It's like there are people who are very standoffish. Not many people that I know, because I hang around people who don't care and that are interested in the truth wherever it comes from. But I found that there are people, and I've realized it's like I feel encouraged, because it's like you and I have talked about, we're kind of on a 200-year plan. It's like, or a 500-year plan. It's like the work that we're doing is like it's going to take a few hundred years for this to take. And it's like I look at the younger generation, and they're very they don't even like. I heard this guy say recently that like they poll everybody, to see what's your religious persuasion, and many people are concerned because there's more and more people saying none. I have no religion.
The growth of nuns for the last 30, 40 years.
But the interesting thing that this guy said was that he says, when you actually talk to these people, what you find out is that what they're saying is, I don't have a particular religious box.
Yes.
Many of these especially the young people who are saying none, I have no religious persuasion, they are very much looking for God and looking for the truth. So I'm encouraged by the young people, because they're not like buying into just the creeds. Like this is what we believe. This is, they're looking for truth, and they're like, I need to be whole and healthy. And so they're like, like they're finding Jesus through the Chosen, video. Yeah. And then, but at the same time, they meditate every day, because that gives them peace. And they're taking the truth, and they're trying to create an active religion and not just a creed. And that's so encouraging. So
yeah. Yeah, and it ties in well to what Jesus has been doing with me since I was born again in 2015, building these Jesus worlds, because there's a technology that we're just starting to see the glimmers of, that will assist people in taking more ownership over their religious practices, their worldview. Even bigger than, I guess, religious practices and so forth, is their worldview, because usually you just inherit your worldview. That's normal. But we live at a different time where it's an opportunity to do more diverse thinking and decide what you want in your world. And this, of course, has always been done. So you have teenagers who aren't sure, they're just going to do what mom and dad and grandpa do. So they'll add some variation. But what's coming is much more questioning of things, and more options, because sometimes there weren't options, like, well, I don't know. And that's what God has opened to me. Right before I met with you, I was saying, my wife was in the tub and she said, yeah, I hope we can come together. What she's talking about is the terms that she sees me using are not, they don't seem appropriate. They're not. And I told her, I said, I get it. And that's part of this episode, as you'll see. When we go back to episode 1, Jesus opened that right up, where the episode, I didn't get to just jump into talking about WakeNOsis. I got to talk immediately about Article of Faith 11, that Greg claims the privilege of worshiping Almighty God according to the dictates of Greg's conscience. And my wife, Sabra, she has the same privilege, and I honor that privilege. And learning to honor that privilege, well, because the idea, the wanting to get on the same page, well, that's natural, very natural. In fact, the devil can use that, because the natural man's an enemy to God. It's kind of like sheep are. We, like sheep, have gone astray. Why did you go astray? I was following the other sheep, and they were good sheep. And who were they following? The other sheep. Who should they follow? The good shepherd. Oh, but he's invisible, so that's hard. So what we'll do is we'll just follow grandpa, we'll follow dad, and we'll just continue that pattern. And then, of course, we know what that pattern is. It's called the false traditions of the fathers. And it's not like they said, how can we worship the devil more? No, the devil took care of that and hijacked the process. Can we jump into episode 1?
Yes.
All right, let's do that. So, or part 1, this is the episode of Suffer Well, and the episode is called WakeNOsis. I suppose there's a number that I haven't yet assigned to what this is. I think we're on episode 2 or 3 of Suffer Well, but this is part 1. And in this episode, Jesus has me open up with the understanding that he's been trying to teach me how to suffer better through retraining and through different rituals that I did not grow up with. These Jesus rituals, they're like customized, like Jesus songs. When I wake up in the morning, that was true yesterday, the day before, today, I wake up and immediately go to work, right in my bed, singing these certain Jesus songs and pondering them in certain ways. And I do, but that's just the start. He's building throughout my whole day. So it's like the Groundhog Day. This day just keeps coming back. And that's true for all of us. But he's taken that as like a whole world that I can build, so that every day I'm getting better and better at something. And that's what he's ultimately saying. Describe that something. What am I doing to you, Greg? And what it's been resulting in is kind of like my response to him. It's kind of like you're doing some kind of hypnotic, otherworldly thing with me, Jesus. And then you could ask, well, why do you keep doing it? Because you're like, this is unusual. And the answer is because he's taken me to a place of peace that surpasses understanding. So when we say peace that surpasses understanding, it means Greg doesn't understand it. It seems like God's taking me to some kind of, well, he described it as, know ye not that the kingdom of God is within you, I think is what the term was, that the kingdom of God is within you. So I'm starting to believe that I have within me, if that makes sense, a heaven approximation. So you were talking about that there exists another world that I can go into. And I'm like, that's not regular Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saint language. When I'm talking that, it starts looking new agey. Oh, you're entering into some portal. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. So I just wanted to two things.
That's
Two
good.
things. And so I'll hit the first one I had. I'm going to save for a second. Remind me that it's about the inward affecting the outward.
Okay.
And
Sure.
creating the outward.
Yep.
So, but the second one you just said, like you know me, I'm always like trying to be broad. So I'm thinking there's probably people listening that aren't Mormon or LDS.
Yes.
I have a Mormon background, but
I like that.
the Mormon background, like, you were saying it's not what people are used to, but the truth is that it's not what some people who are members of that faith are used to.
Yes.
There are some who are very much used to it. And it's a very much a part of their lives, very much a part of their lives. And I found this, and if you look at the beginnings of the LDS movement, it's rampant everywhere. Everybody was having these experiences of altered states of consciousness.
Yeah.
That's why there exists the Doctrine and Covenants. That's why these were, you could call them trances.
Yeah.
That Joseph and other people, my good friend of mine, her great, dear, very dear loved one of mine, her great grandfather was Heber C. Kimball, and Brigham Young said Heber's my prophet, because and Wilford Woodruff, is like the guy he met on the street one day, and he says, I haven't seen your dad since he died. As if he were surprised.
That's right.
Yeah. And so like this is and same thing with this guy last night, the guy that was doing the Bible Project thing. He was talking about, he says, I have approached the Lord for almost my entire life through using this organ of my body, using my brain. And he says, and you can get close. Like he says, I have, he says, the way I put, that God helps me put things together in my mind and stuff. He says, but I'm realizing just in the last year and a half that there's an entire world that I'm an infant. He said, because I have begun to actually experience like connections with God that I didn't even know were possible. Just through things like his son's coming home from school, and then he's like praying that and they're praying together with his sons, praying like something will be fixed because of a bully or something, and then something actually happens, and then he like a miracle, and then like looking and realizing either I can like say that this I can write it off as a coincidence, or I can actually believe that God intervened and brought a miracle in my son's life.
Right.
So like this is happening everywhere because he's in the same boat. It's like, I think that in many ways, there have been people who have been close to the center and who have experienced God throughout religion. But much of religion and the people in religion have been dry like the desert.
Yes.
They have not been experiencing things. They've been interacting with God through the creeds, through the reading, and they'll have warm feelings and stuff, but there's like been very little miracles, very little transcendent experience. So the last thing, to go back, so it's not just Mormons. I think you'll find that everywhere. It's like the people, it's like that they encounter when they begin to have experiences with God, they end up discovering that there are people who have been kind of dry, who are scared of that religious experience where you actually experience something with God. And then the last thing I'll say is that when you begin to experience it on the inside, so like you're saying, there's a place you can go inside, right? And when you go to that place, the strange thing is it creates an outer world around you.
Yes.
It creates like almost like a protective halo. I've experienced it like on the road where it's like I came this close to death I mean, this isn't like small stuff. Like I've had experiences where like I like the only way to describe it is a miracle, and it's like, and I've begun to trust in this place. So the Garden of Eden is going to be created by people who live inside in a certain space, which is peace that surpasseth understanding. And that peace inside that surpasseth understanding creates a world around them
Yes.
of peace, love, harmony, and protection. It's actually like it talks about how those who flee to Zion will be protected and God will fight their battles. And it's like, so you find this when you find somebody who's in that place, it's like George Washington, who they're shooting at point blank range and they can't hit him.
Yes. Right. Okay.
Go
I
ahead.
love
Sorry.
it. You know, and it's great. It taps into what we'll cover some of this. Absolutely.
Okay.
So in that episode, part one, we talked about the power of story. And so my notes, when I went through it this morning, I'm like, okay, so what we're talking about is a Jesus story. That's what my story became, and explains like what's Jesus doing to hypnotize me or to waketize me, and he's using a story, and you'll see that later when we read this one part. That's the power of story, that people hypnotize one another, an approximation of it with story, and that's what we're doing right now. So if somebody's watching us, we're actually using the powers of hypnosis by telling a story, by creating a script that their mind can follow if they want, if they don't resist it. Look at us. No, power of story to transport. So I wrote, beam me up, Jesus. And so just what you're talking about, as though there was this place I could go where I'm protected from fears, where I can access things I didn't always have. Stop me, Jonathan, if you're raising your hand, because I'm kind of reading this, so you'll have to verbally stop me, okay?
Okay. Yeah.
And because it's getting results, that's why I'm staying with it. God has helped me emphasize, by their fruits ye shall know them. Well, he said, by the fruits that you eat, Greg, that you receive from me, that you acknowledge, like, oh, look what Jesus gave me. I will know by its taste. And it fills me with sweetness. So that's how he describes it, like, oh, this is good fruit. And that sweetness, I guess, would relate to the unconscious. So like when you have something sweet, it's kind of an internal feeling that you can describe. Okay, I'm going to kind of scan here. And so Jesus and I had that conversation, like, what am I doing to you, Greg? Like, it's like you're hypnotizing me. And where this then went to, Jonathan, in this part one, was Jesus wanted, before I dove into this hypnosis, WakeNOsis thing, he wanted me to acknowledge, and this was very important, to acknowledge what we just talked about, that using the words hypnosis and hypnotizing, that would not be the preferred language, and is not the preferred language of formal institutions. And many people, other Christians, other LDS like me, they prefer not to use that, even if there's insights. So there's other languages, and we'll discuss some of those. What are the other languages? What are the scriptural languages? But I needed this kind of language, obviously, because I did hashtag hear him Jesus, and this is what he's talking to me about. So I basically say it's fine. Under the Article of Faith 11, you don't have to jive with this. It's just helping me understand Jesus, and it's probably just an interim thing. He may have me later hold fast to traditional spiritual language to describe it. I don't know, but I'm okay with that, because God knows that I'm not other people. And that's what he was emphasizing, Greg, as you build out this Jesus Greg world, because I'm very visible. I mean, www.getmorejesus.com, my full-on relationship with Jesus is pretty much spelled right out there. And here's what Jesus is telling me and so forth. So it's very personal, and thus kind of threatening to people, because Jesus is having me, because I need it, use language that's unfamiliar to people. Be like I started doing hip hop. Why is it necessary for you to talk in rhyme and meter and so forth? Why is that necessary? And they may not understand it. And I may not understand it. I don't know. I feel alive. I feel, oh, you're just doing that so that you don't want to be like the rest of us. Yeah, that might be it. I can't explain it, nor do I feel. Now, Jesus is saying, nor do you have an obligation to explain it other than the best you can. So that's why he had me stop and go like, guys, all I can do is tell you, this is what Jesus is doing with me. And he says, proceed like you are. And so there's no other resolve, because I'm going to follow the good shepherd, not the sheep. You can go show me the most authoritative sheep, but if you're pointing to a mortal person, they are usurped by the supreme prophet, because I follow at the highest level the supreme prophet, which I recognize as Jesus Christ. I love living prophets, woo, and I'll follow them to the ends of the earth, as long as hashtag I hear Jesus go, yes, that is from me. And yes, that is from me. And he does that. I can hear him well enough to go, yes, yes. So you're telling me that sometimes a mortal prophet says something that is not in accordance with what Jesus is telling you. Yeah. And even when it's not in accordance, I can't conclude, well, what I'm doing is right for everybody. No, I would never suggest that. I just say, this is what Jesus is telling me. So we'll talk about variances in the next episode. Jesus sometimes will have one person do something that he does not want the other sheep to do. And that's really hard to get your head around. So when Nephi slew Laban, it wasn't open season on everybody who's drunk stealing plates. No, that was one variance, and it was a hard one. And it's even provocative to bring that up. My wife doesn't like me to bring that up, because the sheep like, oh, you take this one really extreme instance, and then you just say, well, maybe Jesus is telling me to cut off somebody's head. And I don't mean to use it flippantly, but it is put in there for a reason. And that reason is to say something we all know, that God works with individuals in a very individual way. And that becomes awkward. And so in this episode, he's taking and giving me license. You can use hypnosis, Greg, but then you'll see he gives me much better terms than hypnosis. And so I'm not turned against hypnosis. If LDS or Christian or non-Christian was using hypnosis to help somebody find peace in this life, I wouldn't claim that it's evil unless it's being done in an evil way. I'd have to look at it case by case, and then it'd just be my judgment. I'd say, no, you can't use hypnosis for that in a righteous way. But that's just my opinion. So that's the emphasis, Jonathan, and it's tying to a very strong emphasis God has put inside me since I was born again, but especially in the last year. I think he's going to have me gather with a lot of people who do things differently. So Article Faith 11, claiming that privilege, and I think that's part of it too. They're going to start seeing my world built, and they will disapprove. They're like, I don't like what you're doing. The very things that Jesus has had me do, and I need to be comfortable with their disagreement and love them, despite maybe their really energetic disagreement with that. That could be, I don't know, but I just know that's what Jesus inserted in there. Any thoughts?
I think that I think that it's something that you may not need to worry about.
Yes.
Because I think that anybody who listens really don't care. And I found that I think most people don't care.
Yeah.
It's like most of the people I'm around, they don't care whether you go to hypnosis or not. Hey, if it helps you. There's a few people who have a bias, it's like there was probably something said in the circles you were in or that your wife was in that made her a little uncomfortable. I think just like everything else in your life, where like over time, the people who are close to you, even though they don't understand it at first, they kind of slowly start to see it because it has good results. It's like, it'll come out in time. They'll see in time. Well, I think so. So this goes back to suffering well, and maybe this will lead into the episode, and that is that it's like this is part of suffering well, and it's some of us, like sometimes it can be terrible suffering well. It's like you can have people who will, it's like they will denounce you and hate you because of something really stupid. Sometimes, it's like you decide, it's like you're going to do something that's out of the norm, and that, or you're going to use a word that they dislike, and then it's like all of a sudden it's open season and to hate and ridicule you and say all manner of evil against you falsely. And it's like that can happen, and then sometimes it's just inconvenient because, it's like, but the point is that it's like when we love, it's like we're choosing a love which transcends all of that. So the idea is that it's like, yes, like I finally kind of come to the conclusion that it's like this is the way that it works. It's like I'm going to say things that are going to cause other people to hate, vilify, say all manner of evil, because it'll bring up something that'll cause them to you know, and it's like I've kind of come to realize it's like this is the way it's always been.
Yeah.
And somebody tells the truth, and it's so here's what's weird is there's a wave of truth, okay? And it's like most people are kind of like they're in the back end of the wave, you know they're not right up on top surfing the very front edge of the wave. They're accepting truths which the world has already, it's like, so what happens? Some new truth comes out, like a guy in a hospital says you should wash your hands after you leave the morgue and before you go to deliver babies. And people is, no, and he gets like denounced and kicked out of the hospital. I don't remember what happened to the guy, you know, but where was he? Was he on the back of the wave? No, he was on the front of the wave of truth. Because truth is not this stagnant thing, it's moving at us.
Yeah.
It's moving at the world. God is revealing more and more truth. And so it's like there are the people who are on the front of the wave who are just going to get the brunt of, and then there's the people who are on the back of the wave who it's like, everybody has already accepted that you should wash your darn hands, you know, after you leave the morgue and before you go, and that you should be sterile when you do surgeries and stuff. It's like it doesn't take any effort to accept that truth now. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
What
that's
it may
right.
take an effort, what it may take an effort nowadays, if you're talking about medicine, is that it's like nowadays, there are people who are deciding, I'm not going to go to the hospital because it's gone too far. They're too sterile, too stagnant, and it's like, and it's harmful to my spirit to go into that place and have these people who are supposed to be healing me, who are really interested in just, keeping their jobs with the HMO that's kind of become this monolith, and they're withdrawing. And, and they've been suffering because, they're saying, well, I'm going to trust God to take care of me. Or, and in some instances, if they decide to do that with their families, well, then there's people who will persecute them because, they say they're not being responsible. And so it's like, where are you going to, I'm sorry, I've taken too long to say all of this,
No,
but
no, you've done
the
good.
point being is
Yep.
that I think that most people who are listening don't care, and they're on the front of that way, and the other people will catch up, and we just need to suffer well and love them through it.
Yeah, and I do know that this part of the episode is at least 50% for me and 50% for those who say, I want to understand Greg. And so God's emphasizing this because as it goes with hypnosis, it's going to go with everything in my world. You find problems with me saying hypnosis, you're probably going to find problems with me saying Jesus likes classic rock and he's given me new lyrics to the Led Zeppelin song. You're like, no, that just seems wrong. And so
That's far more controversial than hypnosis.
right, exactly.
Go ahead.
And so,
It is.
yeah, and so I've learned to move forward in faith and humbly, just like, yeah, maybe I'm wrong. Let me be wrong for a while. I know that whoever's approaching me, they're wrong, and and if they don't think they're wrong about anything, I'm like, oh, okay, have fun with your
We're not in the same camp then.
with your fantasy. Like, yeah, I'm not going to try to argue to that. And so that's that's probably why Jesus used that, because I'm going where I'm going. The pendulum is just swinging faster and faster, and I know that I'll be doing things and saying things that are controversial. Not to be controversial, although I like being controversial, but I like more doing things that Jesus tells me to do and that work. If Jesus tells me something to do and it doesn't work, I'm not going to do it. But so far, he has. Now, some of them are still waiting for the fruits, but I'm doing it. And I think it's because I'm doing what he says, not because I have the right way. He just likes that you'll obey. And so I'll still bless you. And that's what I do think. He blesses his children, even if they're of the wrong religious faith or wrong approach, they're star children or something. He'll still bless them because they're trying their best. So it's a gospel to try. And that's the spirit I think he's trying to give me. But I know also there's a part of me that's trying to reach out, and it's always been with me, to everybody. And I know God has put that, like, oh, come on, please understand me. But I've come where you are. They don't care, Greg. Like, oh, okay. Well, then I am free. Hallelujah. Thank you for that knowledge. I'll do what I want to do in Christ.
And the ones who do care and they're upset, what I've kind of come to realize is just that there's nothing I can do about it. And it hurts, but all I can do, the best I can do, if I love Christ, is to love them.
Yes.
Through that, to not revile back, to not get angry, but to just say, I'm sorry.
Yes, and I like that, because that's what this part of the episode is too. Because God is emphasizing to my heart, understand them, understand how people might look at this. And I do, because they could have read the same thing. I remember I was on my mission and there was some authoritative voice. It could have been James Talmage or something like that. But they were going on against hypnosis. They probably saw something by psycho-cybernetics and church members getting hooked on that kind of stuff, self-help. They probably said, whoa, we got to turn this around. And so then they start sharing their personal opinions of hypnosis. And they're not making it simple, saying, I'm against evil hypnosis, but I'm all for good hypnosis. No, they didn't make it simple, because that's what I'd say. Oh, evil hypnosis. I hate evil hypnosis, but I love good hypnosis, godly hypnosis. And that's just, of course, doing a synaptic syntax mess around. I know, but it works for me. Go ahead.
Well, and I think the thing that strikes me is that what we desire is to see things that we can't see. So that's the idea of an altered state of consciousness. When we say an altered state of consciousness, every time you go to a movie, you enter into an altered state of consciousness. And it's of course, it's very harmful to go to a movie and to watch some gratuitous violence, for example, because it's like it opens up your soul. But the idea is that it's like, as we're approaching God, it's like we want to see things that we can't see, like the scriptures tell us something like, be at peace when all men say all manner of evil against you falsely. And it's like, and you look at that and it's like, how do you do that? Well, in my present state, like Einstein said, in my present mind frame, in my present state of consciousness, in my present, like, I cannot see that. I cannot experience something which allows me to do that.
Yeah.
But, what do we do when we're quiet? Mother Teresa said something like, silence will bring loving thoughts. Loving thoughts will bring loving actions, and loving actions will bring actions bring, I don't remember. Doesn't matter. Bring something good, right? I don't remember what it was. The
Loving
point
people.
being is that, yeah. And so it's like we got to get comfortable with this. And I hope that the people who disagree will actually listen to this episode and
Yeah.
what we're saying, because it's like, that's what so often happens. I found is that people won't listen. Like they immediately assume something. It's like, listen to what we're saying. We're saying, yes, it's like the idea of hypnosis, the idea of these altered states of consciousness is that it's like, unless your prayers are empty and dry like the desert. And then I don't know what to do for people who that's the case, who the only experience they have with prayer is kneel down and say, God, thank you for da 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 da, please bless da 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 da. And there's no communication, there's no feeling, there's no, they are not altered. I remember once, so I'm sorry, I'm taking too long. I'll
No,
make
you're
this one
not.
quick.
No, this Jesus is in
So I
control.
had an experience where, like, it used to be, like, I remember when I was in my early 20s, I was always really affected by church. And so, like, I'd go to church and I'd sing the songs, and I'm musical, so I love the hymns. And I would cry. I had friends and they said, "We need to get you windshield wipers for your glasses," because all through meeting I'd be taking them off and wiping them, because I would get tears in my eyes, and then the eyelashes would flick onto my glasses. And because I would just weep, and we would partake of the sacrament, and I would sit there and I would imagine, and I would draw close to Christ. And it was such a deep experience for me. And it's like, and unless the speaker had zero spirit of God at all, like, I would find something meaningful, like I would find, oh yeah, and I grasp onto that thing, and then my mind would go off. And I remember once that I met some new friends and I went to church with them. And I remember we had the opening song, and I remember we had the opening song, and I cried like I always do, like
Right.
I always did back
Right.
then,
Right.
and I cried. And then we had the sacrament and I cried. And I became aware, like I felt uncomfortable after a little while. And I realized that the woman that was seated a couple seats down from me, one of these new friends, was like super uncomfortable.
Right.
Like she just was like, and I remember it was such a shock to me that it was like that my relationship, actually having a real experience with God, was actually offensive to her. Having an altered state of consciousness in a meeting was offensive to her. And I remember, like, I didn't even know what to do with that. Like how they don't experience anything, any sort of like connection when they partake of the sacrament or sing a hymn, and I didn't even quite know what to do with that. And so it's like two different worlds. And oftentimes the people who are in this kind of desert, in this dry place, at first have a very violent and reaction to anybody who's having an experience. That's why they sawed Isaiah in half. It's like,
Yeah. Because
you don't say these things. You don't have these experiences. Go ahead.
they're kind of crazy within the
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's like, hey, come on. Yeah, I get it. Okay, so um, let's see. I'll look at my notes. Jesus telling me I need to acknowledge and respect differences of how people approach hypnosis, and a million other things that Jesus will eventually have me build into my world. And I'm to be fine with that. that let's see. And so then we go into oh yeah, I'll just read this paragraph. Within a body of deep Christians, be they LDS or otherwise, you're going to find certain Christians who want to have nothing at all to do with the word or connotations of hypnosis, let alone the practice of hypnosis. Their understanding, their cultural understanding, sees hypnosis in any form as unholy, not of God, akin to witchcraft, sorceries, etc., or just simply unnecessary, that they already have an authoritative language that's sufficient for them. And so that's what I'm supposed to acknowledge. And I'm like, okay. And it doesn't mean that I'm supposed to over respond and dump whatever it is that Jesus is doing with me. It's just to not be blind to that and to acknowledge it. So Jonathan and I have just taken a lot of time to say, we acknowledge it. But I know Jesus is using this to say and the other things, you know, the thousands at least of other things, Greg, that I'm going to have you do, it's the same with them. So if they had a problem with hypnosis, very likely they're going to have a problem with the 10 next things that Jesus has for me. Because Joseph Smith, he's quite an individual, but he had a certain role or mission that involved him receiving a lot of things that look pretty wacky, and they still do to a lot of people. Well, that's my mission. I'm actually called as an architect, engineer, and designer of early Zion, and I think Jonathan is too, of a new culture. And if you have a new culture, and if you're moving kind of at light speed at that culture, not over 50 years or 100 years, then you're going to do a great mashup of existing language to get there. Like Aaron Smith said, the hip hop language. If you need to escape and get into an altered state with your surrounding culture because you feel oppressed, you might start doing things that just look so extreme. But charity and kindness demand, if people want to consider and say, okay, so they're doing things differently. Did they turn into devil worshipers? And some people would say, yes, they did, if you're using that word. Those are extreme positions, because most people would say, oh, if you're referring to God as the Great Spirit, that's not our conventional language. You're not going to find that in our church manuals. And there's a reason, because we've come to a blah, blah, blah understanding, canonized. But would they have a problem? No. Fair-minded, I think, kind-minded people, if you want to call him the Great Spirit. And that's been an issue like me, because I started calling the voice who was talking to me Jesus. And my elders quorum authorities, just one of them, came and said, hey, somebody, and they didn't declare who it was, you're saying Jesus too much. And so I understood what that was. I think, okay, I'll try to tone it down. But I basically have a different worship style than them. I was born again as an evangelical Christian, and it became very Jesus centric. And of course, you see a Jesus world and so forth. But I respect that, because Jesus puts it in my heart to respect it, because my wretched self was like, well, up yours, man. I'll do what I want to do. You do what you want to do. But that's not the spirit that is Jesus. Jesus is like, be respectful, agree with thine adversary, and understand that you grew up in kind of a patriarchal church that was oriented around Heavenly Father. And it's not like Jesus was just a side note. He's kind of like the main thing. But the tongue, the language within LDS has been close, kind of, well, I can just tell you this. Recently, there's been an emphasis that correlates with what Jesus correlated with me in 2015. I was ahead of the curve. Basically, President Nelson said, that little voice inside you, that's Jesus. I'm paraphrasing him, because he said hashtag hear him, and it wasn't hashtag hear Heavenly Father. No, the Father introduces. And so that's the nature of this, is that and I'll leave this topic now, just to say that Jesus had been strongly emphasizing that. So I can tell when he's doing preliminaries. I don't know what's coming next, but it must be super controversial, and maybe a series, because this training, this episode it was very clear. And he's been doing this for a long time. Get used to different, Greg, and understand, what if there's some people that aren't ready to get used to different? Then love them. What if they don't love me? Love them anyways. Ignore them, because you're supposed to pay attention to the immortals, not them, and continue on. So I will. Okay. So in the introduction, and we'll spend about 5 more minutes on this episode. Then I want to jump to the next episode, Jonathan, if that's okay.
Okay.
So in the introduction, I pointed out how religious rituals have a power to do this, to lead our minds into what would be like a meditative, ponderful, I'm using traditional religious terms that would even pass muster, ponderful, meditative, spirit-filled, but I like alternative conscious state. And that is why the emphasis is on hypnosis, because I'm trying to respond to Jesus. Like, what's it like? What you're doing to me with all these different things in my Jesus world that people can look at, once again, at www.getmorejesus.com. You'll see, wow, this is kind of different. I know, right? I'm getting used to that difference. But Jesus is explaining what's going on. He is doing what's called a hypnosis approximation with me. And it's creating results that I like. And what they are is they're like many things. So when you have something new, you're trying to describe something, you'll oftentimes grab different stories, and hypnosis is one of them, but muscle memory is another. That if you repeat certain things a lot, like the guitar, pretty soon you'll have these experiences where it's like you're possessed. It's like, oh my goodness, my fingers know what to do. My conscious self, I I don't know what I'm doing. Am I going to do it right? It's like somebody took over, and they might make a mistake, but that's called flow. And it's kind of an altered state if you study it well. But it's the state that Christ can lead us into. So Nephi described it when he did his third take to go get the plates. He said, I went forth not knowing beforehand the things which I should do, as led by the Spirit. Well, that's language that's getting pretty close to at least the hypnosis approximation, and it's getting close to what I feel God is doing. So a lot of these episodes is me just saying, I think you're doing this, right, Jesus? And he's like, yep, you're warm. That's right. And so the next episode, we're going to, you'll see that this terminology is resolved. So last night he resolved this. And so I'm going to wait, spoiler alert, we're going to get there real quick. So let me see if there's any other thing I want to say here, because people can just go watch part 1 and catch up. Jesus is the best script writer. He writes custom scripts for me. Guess what they do? Psychologists, they'll use scripts, written stories. Jonathan's a story writer. You're going to see in one of the things that we're going to read in part 2, that when you start telling a story, you are doing an approximation, at least, of a hypnotic. And Jonathan already said that you're watching a movie and you move into a hypnotic state. So we'll emphasize that. God is emphasizing that in part 2. Yeah, this is a good way. I could just kind of anticipate what's coming here in the next couple of minutes. This program, WakeNOsis, is unusual in energy of reinforcement Jesus is bringing. So I explained that. And some of it's, I don't know why. Why is this so? Because here I'm going back at it again. That looks like hypnosis. He's trying to take, and am I getting hypnotized by this story? Because anytime Jesus starts repeating things like the sacrament every week, boom, 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 you got to know he's trying to program mind and heart. And so pay attention, and he'll just like, and don't eat it mindlessly. Don't do these rituals. That makes me sick. You need to do it like Jonathan was talking about, where you're crying. Like, what if I can't? Then do it some more. And so we can talk about that. But what I realize, and I've talked about this in other episodes, that when I got born again, he started putting me on some kind of, I realized I was being retrained. They call it becoming a new creature in Christ. They also call it a discipline, or you become a disciple of Christ. You follow him. Like, so you're starting to follow a pattern. You're like, well, I can't see him. Right. So it's a pattern of feeling. Well, you're going to start looking at trance-like stuff. Like, I'm following a feeling. Because yeah, that's, unless you can see him with your eyes. If you see him with your eyes, just follow that. But I don't see him with my natural eyes, so I'm trying to follow him in the feelings. And so, okay, it's actually working. Approximations. As humans, we can and do employ this same hypnosis technology. Oh, yeah. When I did hear him, Jesus explained to me that both Jesus and Satan use hypnosis approximations to capture our attention, and that as humans, we can and we do employ this same hypnosis technology to self-reinforce our beliefs, feelings, and commitments toward truth or error, whichever we are seeking over time. And so let's see, I'm about ready to jump. Want to make this one more comment, because I do know, and Jesus has put in my heart, because I'm an architect, engineer, and designer in early Zion. The emphasis, I know one of the reasons this emphasis is because we're setting up structures that the structures themselves are meant to engage people and create a mental and emotional state. And so Jesus has said that's how Babylon has been built. So the abundance of our human hearts have created what Lehi called the tall and spacious building that is built on sand. And it's received very well by generally most people. There's a few people who are demanding that they hold fast to some iron rod and eat fruit down there. But they're being mocked. And some of them go like, oh, I don't like being mocked. So they'll go to the tall and spacious building. And the tall and spacious building is very, could we call it hypnotizing? It's so attractive and alluring that it can actually kind of put you in a trance where you think everything's okay. All is well in Zion, yea, Zion prospereth. That kind of sounds like a trance. All is well in Zion, yea, Zion prospereth, all is well. And so we'll see in the next episode, Jesus goes right to work calling that the sleep of hell, that you feel okay. Hey, I'm okay. I don't need any of this, whatever that Jesus hypnotism. I don't need it because I'm okay with the normal amounts of Jesus that my parents, I respect Jesus. And so a Bible, we have a Bible. Fruit, we've got fruit. So those people calling down there in that tree of life saying, oh, this is sweet above all that's sweet. No, I've been told that your fruit isn't that sweet, that you guys are just desperate people, desperate hearts, and that the fruit that we have up here in this tall and spacious building is ever so good, maybe even better than your fruit. And we buy it hook, line, and sinker, because it's those are creations, those are stories that are appealing. Who wants to go way back down the stairs and crawl out there through the mist of darkness where you don't know beforehand the things you're doing, to grab hold of some iron rod and work like some kind of discipline to finally get some other fruit that you taste? Well, I do, because I tasted your fruit, Babylon, and I'm done with it as much as I can be. I still eat some of that crap fruit you have. I'm interested in Jesus fruit, and this is the fruits of Jesus. Okay, I'm going to transition over to part 2. If you have any comments about part 1, make them.
What is part 2 about?
Part 2 is called Symbiotic Spirit Possession. Symbiotic Spirit Possession. So we're going to talk about how, I say that Jesus is actually, it seems like he's hypnotizing me.
I think
Yeah,
Yeah,
you can see where it's
I think I
going.
get it. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So I was wondering, I had a comment, but I didn't know whether to save it, and maybe I'll
Sure.
just make it quickly because it sounds like we're going into something new.
Yep.
Um, so stories. Before we leave stories, I just wanted to say how, of course, I'm compelled by stories, and I have been for a long time.
Yes.
Um, and one interesting thing about stories, it does put you into an altered state of consciousness. In fact, it's movies particularly. It's almost like it takes over your subconscious,
Yes.
because normally if you read a book, you're creating all those images. It creates an alternate reality. Um, and so it's like you have to be really careful what alternate realities you create for yourself. Like I'm not a fan of horror movies for that
Right.
reason,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
So it's really important, and it's non-forceful. The cool thing about like stories which are deep and meaningful is that it's like normally if I were to come to you and tell you, look, I believe this, you believe something different, and here's why you should believe what I believe. Even if my arguments are very persuasive, I'm going to hit this, right? This
Yeah.
is why the world, it's like we have so many religions, so many things, because we're all doing this because we're trying to do it on the surface. But a story doesn't do that. It doesn't tell you what to believe. What it does is it shows you something that happens in the life of a person, and within that story, you for yourself begin to see something. That's why, like Hitler and the Nazis created these films before World War II and during World War II that villainized the the Jews. Was that they wanted to embed certain ideas, and so they like, we're going to show you a story about a Jew, and we're going to show you how evil he was and how pernicious and how he was trying to just steal everybody's money and everything. Now, of course, this is not true of like many Jews, but they had a purpose, and so there can be an evil intent in a story and a good intent. And what I'm fascinated by is that the stories that Christ tells and the stories he tells through his servants are very, they're not, how do I put it? Like you talk about people worry about maybe hypnosis, like you're going to be put under a trance, and the cool thing about like the stories that God tells, like the story of the Garden of Eden, um, many of these stories, they're very non-intrusive stories.
Right. Right.
They don't come in and take over your consciousness and point you towards it's like they're so open to interpretation, and they're so I'm fascinated by that. um and maybe we can just
Yeah, I like it.
leave
Yeah,
that because that's part of the last episode. Let's
yep.
move into the next one,
Yeah, we
but I wanted
will.
to point that out, that that's
Yeah,
why we tell stories.
I
So
like it.
okay.
And we are going to be talking about that. So this is part two. So this is the episode that I wanted to engage Jonathan in, but I wanted him to be able to speak to some of the parts in part one. And when Jesus named this, it was interesting. He called it symbiotic spirit possession. So I just want to first draw the contrast. So you may be familiar with the term parasitic. So let's start there. So hypnosis that's evil, that's what it counts on, is a parasitic relationship is one in which um, the host is injured. So if I have a parasite come into me, I'm not benefited by that. That's has a parasitic relationship. And so that's the devil's way, is that he wants a relationship with you, but his intent is to hurt the host. Um, and so um, a symbiotic one is where um, the the person who enters, or the thing that enters inside you, has a healthy relationship. It has something to offer, not just to take away. And so a symbiotic spirit possession would be a spirit that wants to come inside you and improve things, and also be improved upon. So it's God's work and glory to bring to pass the immortality, eternal life of man. So that kind of describes a symbiotic relationship, um, where he's trying to help. And you say, well, where does this spirit possession come in this, Greg? Well, Jesus has me studying, and he has for quite some time. You'll hear me use this term, get more Jesus, www.getmorejesus.com. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means many different things, but it's kind of a volume thing. It's like you can have a little bit of Jesus or a lot of Jesus. And it kind of implies you're saying have it where? Inside you. So the Book of Mormon opens up with a story of Lehi. He's out preaching. And then he has this experience when he goes home where he's filled, Filled, filled with the Holy Spirit. Apparently to such an extent that his body could barely handle it. The Spirit of God can be, if you don't have a lot of it inside you, it can kind of destabilize you. So he flopped on his bed. I don't think they didn't use the term flop, but basically that corresponds with my understanding of what I'm seeking is more Jesus. Now the key scripture here, there's two key scriptures. One's the sacrament prayer, and that is by remembering Christ always. We ask thee to bless and sanctify this bread to the souls of all those who partake of it, that they may do so in the remembrance of the body of thy Son, and witness unto thee, O God, the eternal Father, that they do. They're willing to take upon them.
Did you always remember him?
Always remember him, and have his Spirit to be with them. You say, okay, with them, so I can be with my wife in my house. Okay, she's not inside my body, but actually, that's where Jesus wants to get as close to that as possible. So husband and wife have union and they have kids. And so he really likes closeness. And here's how the second scripture, this is what he informed me with. He prayed a prayer out in the open in the scriptures anyways to his Father. And he said, speaking of us, his children, that they, Father, he's desiring that they, Father, might be one as I am with thee. And so Jesus, whether it's right inside you or close by, Jesus' desire is to inhabit your immediate vicinity, actually your vessel. That's how I interpret it. And that's fine. I'm not a doctrinaire, but I'm comfortable enough to know, the third scripture. So in the Book of Mormon, this is one of the key scriptures for spirit possession. Nothing like it found throughout all of the scriptures that I know about. Well, there's like it, but this one's clear. That same Spirit, this is Alma 34:34. And they're talking there's a warning going, I think, to a son saying that same Spirit that that has power to possess you, that same Spirit that possesses your body while in this life will have power to possess you in the world to come. And that's the key right there. What he's saying is, I believe, a doctrinal truth, that we are possessed by spirits, plural. So when Nephi said, "Oh, wretched man that I am," he was talking about a part of himself, but also that's influenced by other spirits. And so there's a competition for our vessel. And there's an opportunity to get more of one or the other. As for me and my house, we desire to have our Lord come into us, to have an open heart. He's knocking, he says, and to bring that in. And so when you see this term, you were choking on hypnosis, you might start choking on spirit possession, because what I'm using is a term that sounds like Harry Potter land or something. You're not going to find spirit possession often mentioned in church manuals. I think Alma 34:34 is the only time. You're not going to find it heavily emphasized. But Jesus has been heavily emphasizing that with me so that I would understand, what are you trying to do here, Jesus? What are you trying to do? And he says, I want to be inside you. I am inside you. Here's the thing. Spirit possession, like, I don't know if I want Jesus inside me. He's in, Doctrine and Covenants says, he's in all things and through all things. So you're like, well, then what's he trying to do? What he's trying to get you to do is take the bushel. I mean, this is my parable understanding. Will men light a candle and put it under a bushel? The answer to that is yes, they will. That's the natural thing. What's the candle? It's Jesus. He's inside you. I've got a little light inside. And the idea for me is, this is what Jesus used that parable. He said, I want to lift that bushel off so that there's light in all of your house. Of course, my house being Greg Muller's vessel and whatever else spiritual room I occupy. He wants to lighten everything, but he's still in there. If I've darkened him, it's just simply, he's in all things, through all things, and that the darkness comprehendeth it not. He wants me to comprehend him, to see him, to look to him, to respond to him, to that light. So that's my, I guess I'd call it a short explanation, because it's a pretty deep topic about spirit possession, because there's so much we don't know. And I'm just telling you what Jesus told me, and he used scriptures to do it. So I would be on pretty solid territory, at least at the wrapper level. I don't know about how things work, and there's different opinions, and I'm not really called by God to explain all the workings of the spirit and so forth. Joseph Smith was more so, he'd get down to, like, if you see an angel, shake hands and so forth. He was more versed in that kind of stuff. But even still, the church that he established, that's not where Jesus has taken that church. We're not thought of as the New Age church that's always talking about spirit inhabitants and so forth like that. We just kind of lightly touch upon those. But I can tell you where Jesus is leading me, heavy on being aware that there are spirits. Jesus told me there's energy and entities. So they feast upon, so like parasites, if you start getting angry, you want a parasite, a spiritual parasite, just go get mad at people, have contention, and those entities like energies. So it's called the law of the harvest or whatever, the law of attraction, I mean. Filth seeks filth. So if you want to be possessed by evil spirits, I can tell you how to do it. Just start being filthier. Say some more cuss words, cheat people, because that stuff will bring energy. It creates energy, and they feast off it. The devil would like people to be miserable, like unto himself, because guess what he wants? Kind of the opposite of Jesus wants to glorify us. He wants to deglorify us and bring us where he is, so that we resonate with his energy. So like it or not, there's two big energy entities out there, one called God and the other called the devil. And, go watch Star Wars, and you understand at some parable level, there's a dark force and a light force. And the light force is in and all through things, as far as I know, in and through all things. But it does its symbiotic work with the willing. So the devil's not willing. So, but I'm trying to be willing, and that's how I actually got born again. I'm like, what happened, Jesus? And he said, you yielded to me. I basically let him take the basket, the bushel, off of the candle, and it started lightening my house. And it was a little bit scary, weird, but it started rebirthing parts of me. And he's not done, but it brought light into the house. And so that's why is Greg doing Jesus TV? This is just an extension of what that is. I'm continuing that process, and it helps me become possessed by his spirit. So back to the sacrament prayer, then I'll turn the talking stick back over. So the sacrament prayer has been the central focus for me, because it explains it. And what I'm doing. Christ is using, when you go to www.getmorejesus.com, he's creating a memory device, because he's taught me that is how I'm able to keep his spirit to be with me, is by remembering him. And in order to remember him, I have to look to him and think about him. And so the sacrament prayer touches upon that, that they may always remember him, that they may have his spirit to be with them. So, and remembering him might be remembering the things that are light and truth, and having those be part of what I'm remembering. and what are on the things that are on my mind. So we look to Christ, which makes us think of what? Well, what you're looking to, you'll think of the thing you're looking towards. So I try to put Jesus in front of my eyes and ears as much as I can, because that will change what I'm thinking. And once you start changing your thinking, you're going to start talking about what you are thinking about. And then you're in Second Nephi 25, 26, Second Nephi 25, 26 territory, which is you'll start talking about the thing that you're thinking about. So we talk of Christ. And once you talk enough, you're going to start preaching like, oh, I'm going to start propounding this. You're going to start wanting to preach the gospel to every creature. And once you start preaching, here's the thing. You're not just preaching about some static object. You're preaching about a future, because it's always God's an eternal being, and so he's often focused on the next thing. The next thing. Damnation is let's just focus on this one thing. We're going to be damned. Just stop the water. Jesus is like, well, no, let's do the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. So you'll have what's called the spirit of prophecy. And so then we talk of Christ, preach of Christ, and then inevitably you'll start prophesying. You'll start saying things that are future driven, future oriented, but also they interpret the past, things in the past, in the present, and they start redeeming things in the past. You're like, whoa, 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 what's going on? But then ultimately you'll start doing what I've been doing. You'll write them down. Jonathan's writing things down right now that you're like, I don't want to forget these. There you go. Back to the sacrament prayer. I don't want to forget these things. And so then you'll begin to repeat these things. That's what writing things down, it allows you to do it in your mind. So tying this back to hypnosis or WakeNOsis, one of the features of being able to wake up or to have a hypnotic trance-like state is repetition, because sometimes you need to say something more than once and maybe differently, more than once, differently, and emphasize certain things. And that's how songs are hypnotic. When movies are put together, do you think you're just seeing something one time? No, if you understand movies, you go study them, they'll create all these themes. They'll, for instance, choose a color. And the artist, the producer, the director, I'm sorry, will often choose a color like red. And so if you pay attention, like he introduces red, 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 and it becomes a theme that doesn't disturb the story, but it's playing on your unconscious. Also, what they'll do is movement. They'll have movement, so they can move in here, then the camera move here, and they will use all kinds of different elements to talk to your subconscious, because your subconscious loves stories. Okay, that's why it dreams. And so they can put you in a state where your subconscious starts rolling with that, and it's fun, because dreams can be fun, especially when they're controlled. Sometimes dreams are whack, but if you could control your dream, which is called vivid dreaming, which is where Jesus has taken me. He's like, Greg, I'm going to show you how to control your waking dreams. What? Your waking dreams? When you wake up, Greg, are you dreaming? And that's where we'll go. So this episode will actually have a different name. After Jonathan makes his comments, you'll see that last night, Jesus told me an alternative name for this episode, but we'll tie those two themes together: symbiotic, spirit possession. So I'm going to tell myself, what we're talking about here, all these tools Jesus is giving you are essentially, this is harder, conjuring tools that we can conjure. And I agree that word's pretty laden with dark magic stuff, but we call it evoking the spirit, evoking, inviting, opening the door, evoking, but it's basically a similar thing we've been talking about, because we'll, as we saw in part one, Ericksonian scripts. So hypnosis people, therapists and so forth, so they don't have to make up the stories. They'll actually have successful stories that they'll tell people, and then they'll share those. and they call them Ericksonians. I guess that was the guy that built a lot of these scripts. They'll read, so they can just read them and get familiar with them, then add their own little mojo, and it tends to help people get into a trance-like state, so that then they can make adjustments to their life they couldn't otherwise if they're just relying on their conscious normal state. And so that's enough. That's what we're talking about, is how Jesus has created the scriptures, songs, hymns, religious rituals, all to create a pathway for him to come into us, if we're willing, and if we can engage with earnestness, sincerity, a broken heart, because that's kind of what hypnosis are trying to break your resistance. Come on, get along. And so people like me are hard to hypnotize, because I'm a dirty, filthy, hard-hearted. I'm not the easiest person to hypnotize. So Jesus has been using massive amounts of what he'd call crutches. It'd be, another term would be massive amounts of different kinds of scripting to allow me with my brokenness to enter into what some people enter into so easily. Some people, they're almost born into this alternative state. And so we'll talk about that when I introduce the new title. Jonathan, you're up. I saw you taking notes.
So we'll say, so I think one of the things that, one of the things that may be difficult for some people is the idea that they think about, like, the idea of just being themselves, and then they think about, the idea of being possessed by a spirit, and what they picture is poltergeist.
Yes,
right.
Scary stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
Scary stuff, and that they think that's the only time that anything besides them is inside of them. But the truth is that it's like that's, there's in the circles that I'm in, one of the things we'll talk about sometimes is company. It's like, he's got some company, it's like if somebody's getting all angry, and it's like, or if they have certain traits that lead, and we usually say it in kind of a negative sense. It's like, well, there's some negative company there. There's something that's not just
a soft way. That's a soft way, rather than say they're possessed, which is a pretty brazen thing to say. You say something a little softer. They have company. Oh, okay. Grandma's over.
Well, the scriptures call them familiar spirits.
There you go. That's right.
Okay. It's like they're familiar. And most of the time that word, even that phrase, familiar spirits, is used in a negative sense, right? So we have they're familiar spirits. So I heard a near-death experience where a guy said that he is in the operating room, I think, and he came out and he saw his wife, and there was a spirit there that was trying to comfort her, and then the spirit finally said, "Can I come inside you?" And he spoke to her spirit. Now the woman was just sitting there in the waiting room, nervous, and he said, "Can I?" And her spirit responded and said, "Yeah." So he saw this spirit kind of inhabit her body from it. This is getting probably weird for some people, but it's not super weird for me. It's like this sort of stuff is real. So and one way to think of it is, even the psychologists of today, if you look at Freud and the other ones and Jung, they will attest to the fact, like, we think that we're like one person, but like they talk about the different elements of the psyche, and I don't even know how this all works. I don't know like they talk about how you can have fractured parts of yourself, almost as if from the very beginning we're intended to be just kind of one thing, but it's like there's multiple parts of us that are choosing to function together as one.
Yes.
So even our spirits are kind of a multi-dimensional sort of a thing. So Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to, because this gives a good segue to what I wanted to introduce, and just be done with right here. So one of the things Jesus has brought to my attention is that the religious language that we grew up with has codes for some of these things that we understand roughly in a secular way, like you're talking about Carl Jung, that we have what's called body and spirit. So like, okay, well, isn't that, yeah, that's right here. Gray's got body and spirit. Oh, so there's more than one thing going on? Because the secular were like, no, it's just a body, it's just a bunch of chemicals and so forth. But like, no, there's a spirit. Then we have this thing that's called the soul of man. So like, you could have Neil Maxwell had a talk called Caring for the Soul. And it's like, he's just combined two things, spirit, and I think he's combining.
But it's not really quite the same. It's
So it wasn't a conference talk. He was going to deep dive on those distinctions. He just wanted like, hey, like you say, company, and I'm just going to talk about the soul. Well, what's that soul? Oh my goodness, I was in sociology, and we did this graduate work, and I was like, oh my goodness, the level at which you can dive into the self, as you're speaking of, this multi-dimensional self. It's like so complex, and I had to stretch my mind just to, pass the class because they're dealing with this. And so it's not easy. And people are like, I just want it easy. Me too. But Jesus has started to make it a little bit more complex. But one way he made it easier for me to understand what he's talking about, roughly, because that's all Jonathan and I are qualified to talk, is roughly kind of what we're understanding right now, which can change. But the heart is used as a kind of a placeholder for what we call the unconscious, because you can go through the scriptures. Where is the unconscious talked about? Well, that's kind of a modern term, the unconscious versus the conscious self. We're very aware of the conscious self, and there's scriptures, and we'll read them, the sleep of hell and so forth, where there seems to be some communication with these spirits going on, with a part of us that is not immediately present. It's like the dreaming self. And so heart could be termed as for the unconscious. And so we have scriptures that say, where a man's heart is, there his treasure is also. In other words, your conscious self says, I want to lose weight. And your unconscious self says, sure, as long as we can continue to eat as many hamburgers as we want. And so there's a battle for anyone who's tried to lose weight. And it's a battle sometimes between what the conscious, reasonable us wants to do and the impulsive us and so forth. So we won't go much further, or I won't. You're free to do whatever you want to do there. But I wanted to acknowledge the complexity of it, but also how Jesus is resolving that. He's like, yep, you can talk about the unconscious, and I'm glad that you're thinking about these things, Greg, and how hypnosis, how the things that he's helping me build, Jesus is helping me build so I can retrain my mind and my heart. They definitely go to some things that are unconscious and are trance-like. And that I think he's trying to make me more comfortable. Honestly, part of it, just be more comfortable with what he's doing, because I've participated in some really what are strange for humans like to do. Like, oh, you're really going to have me do this, Jesus? And I don't understand it. My wife doesn't understand it. Other people, but it works. I'm like, wow, that's like going to the chiropractor and he's doing really wacky, weird stuff. But you come out, you're like, my back's feeling better. And then somebody goes, that must be witchcraft. Yeah, if it works, let's say the devil stuff works. No, it's of God, because I don't know if he wants me to walk around in pain like that. And plus, then I'll have these coinciding thing. I wasn't even thinking about going to the chiropractor, but then this guy said this, and I've been praying. Well, that's the big part of the story. And this, so if I have a story where I'm suffering, and then Jesus tells me go to a hypnotist, and I get feeling better, and the hypnotist is reinforcing Jesus or light or truth, I'm going to conclude, thank you, Jesus. I'm not going to say thank you, devil. Okay, go ahead, Jonathan.
Well, and it's all in the details. So there's an old saying that the devil is in the details. And there's another saying by William Blake where he said, virtue resides in minute particulars. It's like you take two people that do the same thing, they kill a man. And well, what makes one a murderer and one a hero?
Yes.
It's like, it's the details of
Yeah.
why, of exactly what happened, of the situation. It's the details.
Yes.
To go back to one thing before we move on. So that's the difference with all this stuff, is that it's like another quote that I really love was, there's a hair's breadth between the sublime and the profane. It's actually Brigham Young that said that. There's a hair's breadth between the sublime and the profane. And it's like, and it's the details. It's like, two people had sex. Well, what makes one of those terrible adultery, which is going to destroy a family, and some uplifting thing that's going to lift you up and make you a better person and bring beautiful children into the world? It's like, it's the details.
Yeah.
So so to go back to one thing, to take one little thing that I think is a good thought that helps us to understand what we're going into is, it's like this idea that we're not just us, that we are, and what I think God desires for us, and what we're trying to go towards, is a place where we reside, in a place spiritually where we are in harmony. Okay, where we are multiple things, but that's okay. All the things that we are all in communion.
Yes.
All desiring the same best for the individual, etc. So a good example of this. So you have two people, a man and a woman, they get married, they have children. So when they have those children, when you think about it, think about this. You're half your father and you're half your mother. You think, like I think about myself, I'm Jonathan Aaron McCormick. I'm an autonomous being. But the truth is that there's all sorts of stuff that I do all the time that it's like, why do I do that? Well, my dad did that. Why do I do this? Well, my mom did that. And it's like, we're not ourselves.
Yeah, you're
We
walking
are,
around in a trance, a biological trance, aren't you?
yes. Yeah, it's like, and you think, like, you become a parent and you're like, I am not going to do things the way my parents did them. No way. And then, things come up and you're like, how do you react? Well, it's innate within you, because it's not you.
Yeah.
There's the
right.
but there's this part of you that's not in harmony with what you have decided is good. And then you start to realize, well, what is good? And you don't totally know, and God has to show you, and it's this mystery. But that's a good way to understand all this, is that you want to be in harmony with all those spirits that have your best interest. And of course, we know, and most religions have this framework to understand, that there are spirits who fell.
Yes.
And they no longer desire the good of the whole. And they want to possess your body. Do you want to be possessed by those types of spirits? No. You want to be in harmony with, and have, like I have that right now, I have the spirit of my father within me right now. And so long as my father, his spirit is not evil continually and desiring only his own good, well, then he can reside within me. And I love, like, when I sense my dad with me, it just feels so good, because I love my dad. And same with my mom, when I sense her. And because we can reside together, my mother can reside in me, and my father. And that's why divorce is so difficult and so harmful oftentimes, and why it brings such, is because the child all of a sudden has a fracture in their psyche, because now they have to decide, oh my gosh, they are not one thing anymore. So therefore, I am not one thing anymore. So therefore, who am I? Am I my dad? Am I my mom? When my parents got divorced, it was like, I sided with my dad for quite a while. And then I realized that my dad had misjudged my mom somewhat. And then I was like with my mom. And then finally my psyche resolved, and I allowed it to be okay. Like that was what introduced me to the world of brokenness, and to the world that Christ teaches us, where it can be okay that something broke. And it can still all be one thing in Christ.
Yes. Yes.
Christ, my parents are still one. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
even
Yeah.
in our brokenness.
Yeah, that's
In
right.
him, in some way, we are still one. So it's all resolved in him. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
and which he's infinite, and so our minds can't comprehend how it could be so, and that's, but we can still accept, just like we have to. If you're a scientist, you have to accept things, like Einstein, he couldn't understand how, what's called quantum entanglement could be true, because his theory didn't jive with that. He didn't have an understanding, and it was spooky for him. He called it spooky action at a difference. How one particle could be eons away from another particle, 1,000 light years, and that particle could immediately react to the other particle because they're entangled. But the math checked out, and then they've the science, and that's one of the major observations. It's going to be about quantum computers. So there's things as humans and that's where we have to have a broken heart, contrite spirit, humility, and say, well, maybe I don't know. And that's why Jesus uses that parable. Greg, you're in kindergarten, and every mortal is, and that's how smart you are. And I'm like, oh, that's pretty idiotic, right? Even the smartest person, the most authoritative person you've met, doesn't mean they can't, because even babes are given information from God. But beware, if they're mortal, beware, because they're the immortals, like graduate school and understanding. Okay, so speaking of graduate school and understanding, this is what Jesus oftentimes does. It was the night before this moment that Jesus told me what he wanted this episode to also be called. So it's called Symbiotic Spirit Possession, but it is also called Dehypnotized. And so this morning I spent time, and I don't have this link that I can share there, do I? Let's try it. Okay. Can I share my screen so you can see so Jesus talks to me in memes. He'll have me create a meme with him, and then oh, there we go, share screen. Let's see, I think it's this one. Yeah, tell me what you see, Jonathan.
Dehypnotized from a
uh
false belief. You want me to
cool.
read it?
Nope, that's
Okay.
going to be that's my script there. This is meme 9. So I put these memes here,
Nice.
then I post them to Facebook, and later they get embedded into my Jesus world. So this is not the one I want you to look at, but this is where he introduced this term last night. And I like it better than WakeNOsis, but he's keeping them both, WakeNOsis, to wake up. And this is still loading up, speaking of, dehypnotize. Come on up. There we go. Thank you, Lord. Got the one more. One more, streaming the bits. Aha, there we go. Nope, that's a different one. Okay. Can you see that okay, Jonathan?
Yep.
Sad fact, we are all hypnotized. And what are we hypnotized that Jesus is concerned about? We're hypnotized by false beliefs. So sad fact, we are all hypnotized. Jesus will dehypnotize you from your false beliefs. Hashtag hear him. So that's what Jesus is telling me. Greg, my intention is to dehypnotize you. In other words, beliefs put you into a sleep, into a hypnotic state. And that's what we all are. So if you believe things that are not true, you're hypnotized by those beliefs. And here's a scripture. Oh, that you would awake from a deep sleep, yea, even from the sleep of hell, and shake off the awful chains by which you are bound, which are the chains which bind the children of men, that they are carried away captive. So you see, change, bind, captive down to the eternal gulf of misery and woe. 2 Nephi 1:13. So that scripture has a lot of energy behind it to say our awful state as humans, that we come down here and we're wrong about a lot of things. And to the degree that our beliefs do not coincide with Jesus's, then there's a lot of misery that affects how well we can suffer. And so that's dehypnotize is the I'm just going to call it the nickname for this episode. Any thoughts, Jonathan?
Yeah, I think that's the idea. It's like waking up.
Yeah. Yep. And so now let me go to the script.
Well, and can I just interject one more thing too? Like
Sure can. Yep.
recently I just started watching a bunch of near-death experiences again. I hadn't done that for years. And everybody that goes to the other side, you know what they say? They say it's more real.
Oh.
So if we're in a world that's less real, then it's like it's going to feel like hypnosis. Okay, we're going to have to imagine, we're going to have to do everything we can, because what we're really trying to do is to get to the more real world. And it's like that's what we see the prophets like go to their deaths and nothing. It's like death is nothing because that world has become more real. So you're telling me that something you can't even see is more real than see? Right, that's what you want. And so you have to alter your state of consciousness, because the mental consciousness only believes what comes in here, the eyes, what comes at the ears, what it can express with its fleshy tongue. So that's the idea. We got to wake up to a more real world.
Yes. Yep. And in the secular world, they have a term for people who are living in a fantasy world. They call it, let's see, did we lose one another? Are you still there? Are you still there?
Lost you for a minute.
Oh, we're back. We're
I'm
back.
here. Can you see me?
Yep, I can see you.
Okay.
Yep, we're back. Technical
Okay.
difficulties on Jesus TV. Yeah, can't remember where my thought was like that. Where do you recall what I was?
You said people in the secular world,
Oh,
something.
yeah, they have a terminology for people who are going to an alternative reality that they don't agree with, and it's called superstition. They're interpreting the world through superstition, and in some ways, like, please make me superstitious, Lord. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say the main reason people won't go there is they don't want to be wrong. They don't want to be deceived. And I
Yes.
totally get it. Like,
Yeah.
I totally get it, because that's real. Like, people, there are people who are superstitious who, it's like, I believe that my neighbor is, like, brewing something over there and she's a witch. And I know it because I saw her the other night. And the truth is, they've tuned into a spirit, which is the false spirit.
Yes.
And so that's why the path to God is fraught with humility, because you kind of know when you go being a little bit crazy, you're probably going to make mistakes. Sometimes you're going to mistake your own thoughts for the voice of the spirit. Sometimes you're going to mistake maybe some spirit that doesn't have the best intent. What I found, one thing that's encouraging, is I found that the people who are really uh, duped kind of into a false, they don't question their own delusion.
Right.
It's like,
yeah, they're not humble.
and the fact that I still question and I'm always concerned that I might be on the wrong path is so encouraging to me.
Right. Yeah,
Like, God, show me where I'm wrong.
Right. Yeah, that humility to be like a little child and go, well, maybe I'm wrong about this.
Yeah.
And then for God, it's been important to not assign, for me, not to assign anybody, any other mortal, as necessarily having more understanding of how the world works. That's Jesus. Hashtag hear him. And he didn't say hashtag hear anybody else, but he will speak through other people. So the thing is, that's where I got that dehypnotize. It's my friend Brad Van Dyke, and I knew that was from Jesus. So you'll hear me, I rarely attribute things to other people that I hear them from. I just go, this is I got from Jesus, because that's the one I'm paying attention to. That's who I believe anything that's lovely, good report, or praiseworthy. That's Jesus, and that's what I seek more of. Not afraid of or opposed to giving credit where credit's due, which I just did there. But so you mentioned the person who may be thinking the next neighbor says, oh, they're so superstitious. They think Mary's a witch. And so Joan gets in her car and doesn't say anything about the fact that she's going down to get liposuction and some Botox, so that she can feel better about herself, her holy self. And she's driving a car that she knows is makes her sexier. And in other words, she's fully embedded. She's fully hypnotized into many elements that allow our economy to go on, where people think, I need a nice car because I'm a realtor and people won't buy. Well, they're right, because these people are hypnotized. Like, I can't buy a house from somebody that's got a junky car. And so we work in a matrix that's almost self-fulfilling. Sorry, if you're going to play in here, you're going to have to swallow some pills that make you look pretty superstitious. Because you have this woman, she might have this thing called anorexia that you and I could look at and like, girl, you look like a model, you look so good. But when she looks in the mirror, she sees a big old fatty. And that's why she's going down to get that liposuction or mouth injections. And, you know, same could go for men. And so we have to be careful that laughing at our neighbors for maybe thinking that somebody else is superstitious and so forth. That's, I wanted to get that in. Okay, are we okay to go into this episode? Okay, so I'm going to read this pretty quickly because I think we'll finish up in a half hour. Okay, that'll be our goal. This was just where Jesus took me. It's I have the feeling that it was just kind of some scratch that we could talk about. It wasn't a particularly important website, but it's how to access the unconscious mind, 5 ways to bypass the conscious mind using conversational hypnosis. Conversational hypnosis works because it can do something extraordinary. It can access the unconscious mind. It can help switch off the conscious, critical, analytical mind and let the unconscious mind take over. As soon as that happens, your subject can go into a trance. And once they're in a trance, that's when you can start helping them solve their problems. Sounds like the devil, sounds like Jesus too. Of course, because people go into a trance, because people can go into a trance completely on their own when they're watching TV or reading a book or driving a car, like what we've talked about. Their thoughts drift away almost as if their conscious mind was taking a break. At times like that, it happens by accident. Where hypnosis is concerned, though, you want it to happen deliberately. But how to go about it? Believe it or not, you can access the unconscious mind just by talking to people. You can put them in a trance with nothing more than a conversation, which is where the name conversational hypnosis comes from, without them even knowing you're doing it. Important, and I agree, important. Conversational hypnosis should only be ever used ethically and as a force for good in someone's life. It's not mind control and should never be used to get something you want from someone else. Therefore, in any conversation where a state of hypnosis is induced in your subject, the suggestions you make to their unconscious mind are always in their highest and best interest. Okay, well, buyer beware. Because
I think I see the reason why people have a bit of a problem, because that assumes that the hypnotizer knows what's best for the other person.
That's right.
It's like,
it's
like, let Jesus do that.
Yeah, exactly. So I can see the reticent, but the people who have the reticence, I would also point to the fact that they're being hypnotized anytime they go to Walmart, anytime they see an advertiser. At least an attempt is made, and advertisers aren't throwing their money away down some dark hole. It's working, maybe not on everybody, but whatever. So number 1, the hypnotic power of a good story. You'll like this, Jonathan, because this is when I started thinking of you for this episode. Can you guess how many books are published every year, or how many movies are released? Probably a lot more than you think. But why so many? because everybody loves a good story, whether it's in the form of a novel or a film. Stories have the power to transport us, to let us experience other people's lives, to help us put our problems into perspective. And one of the easiest ways to tell the story is using the antidote, or my friend John format. It doesn't have to be John.
Hey, Greg.
Yes, go ahead.
Greg, I hate to interrupt.
No, go, do.
So because I live on in where I live, I need to use the restroom really
Yes,
fast. Can I
absolutely.
just pause and come back?
Yeah,
I've got to run to the
yep.
public restroom that's
I'll
right over here.
I'll entertain them with a song. All right,
Okay, sounds
with
good.
a
I'll see you in a
Jesus
second.
song. All right. It's about 11 o'clock, so it's time for the Jesus Carrot song. So here we go. The Jesus Carrot song. There was a time. I hope this puts you in a hypnotic trance state. There, it does me. So I'm going to give you an example. Yeah, this is one of the routines. So every day, it's usually 11 or it could be noon. So I fast until that time, have my breakfast, and I don't have my carrot with me. So I will eat that after this episode's done. But this song is specially built by Jesus. It's a classic rock song that Jesus wrote with Aerosmith, Steven Tyler. I don't know if he was the actual author of that, but he certainly sang it, called Crying. And Jesus, I guess, liked that because he helped him do it. But he needed a converted, a Christian version that then he gave to me. So here it is. And it reinforces my born again status, kind of like what Jesus is doing with me and our relationship. Okay. Every day, here we go. There was a time, should we go a little lower? There was a time when I was so hard-hearted. God wasn't much of a friend of mine. The tables have turned. Yeah, me and those ways have parted, 'cause carnal love is the killing kind. Now listen, all I want is someone I can't resist. That's all I want. I know all I need to know by the way that I got blessed. I was crying when I met God. Now I'm trying to beget God's love. It's sweet mystery. I was trying just to get through. Now I'm dying to let you, God, what you do, rescue me. Ba ba bum bum. Now there's not even breathing room. Ba ba bum bum. In this world full of pain. Ba ba bum bum. You are the one true God. Ba ba bum bum. Who keeps us from going insane. It's down on me. Yeah, I got to tell you one thing. It's been on my mind. God, I gotta say, we're partners this time, 'cause you've got that certain something. What you give to me, God, takes my sins away. Now the word out on the street is the devil's in a mess. Since your love lit up my life with a fire I can't resist. I was crying when I met God. Now I'm trying to beget God's love. It's sweet mystery. I was trying just to get through. Now I'm dying to let you, God, what you do, rescue me. 'Cause what you did inside me, it's where your love should stay. Your love, sweet love, it's now in my heart to stay. And then I repeat the chorus. And then I eat the Jesus carrot. And I say, Jesus, this tastes like you. Now, Jesus also tastes like an apple, but a plain carrot, yep. I need to be reminded of that sometimes he just tastes healthy, not exciting, not like Jesus TV, uh, hypnosis or WakeNOsis or dehypnotizing episode. Sometimes Jesus is just like burying a hole that I dug right behind me outside, fixing faucets. Oh, got to do that today too, with Jesus and the angels. So I'm learning to do that with Jesus and the angels. And it's almost like I need to be hypnotized to really believe that an invisible God is with me. I mean, you're almost going to have to hypnotize me. I don't know if you'd call it that. Oh, Jesus says I would call it that, but I would also call it dehypnotizing, because the truth is I'm with you, Greg. Oh, okay. So my false belief is that you're not here, right? And that's easy to believe because I got eyes that like, no, I don't see Jesus. I see Jesus TV. I see myself on Jesus TV. Where are you at, Jesus? And he says, use your feelings, Luke. Okay, I'll use my feelings. Use the force. Yeah, that's another term. So Jesus has many different terms, and he let Steven Spielberg use the force. Like, whoa, I didn't see that
Ah,
church
thanks.
manual. Oh, that's good. I was just wrapping it up. We occupied the time. I put them all in a trance with my Jesus Carrot song. So we are good to go. So we're going to go back to, unless you got anything else to say, I'm going to go back to the little reading. Okay. So they were saying, it doesn't have to be John. It could be any name, male or female, depending on the subject and the situation. You're simply telling a story about a friend of yours. To follow what you're saying, the subject has to play along to get involved. That's the nature of the story. You're going to play to relive the experience with you. And if that experience involves going into a trance, which will be apparent if they exhibit one or more of 14 trance signs explained in the free report below. There they are selling stuff. Woo, I'm in a trance. I'm going to have to buy that. Nope, I'm not going to do it because Jesus says you don't have to buy the book. Okay, good. So Jesus kept me out of that, meaning that you will get them into a trance even without trying. So just your story. Naturally, you won't.
That's fascinating.
Oh yeah, go ahead. Any comment there?
That's fascinating. That just the story does that. So go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's.
I guess that's what we were saying before.
Oh,
But yeah.
and it ties in with I can still remember this graduate school professor. He was talking about how to get laid at the bar, and he said, "What you got to do is you got to be a good storyteller." And he wasn't just talking about having sex with somebody. He was talking about closing business deals and so forth. So, good storytellers. Well, there's your salesman. They can have a good trance, like because that's who the devil has employed. You think those guys aren't the ones, his front line? They are the best storytellers because they have to convince you that what you're doing is okay. At the bare minimum, this sin that you're committing, maybe they can even get you to say it's justified. I'm doing this for a holy reason. Woo, I feel like a prophet. I'm like Isaiah. And then you just totally sin all crazy like, and they can tell you a story. If you can't come up with it themselves, spirits are like, that dream thing, whoever runs those dreams at night, well, they're like that. They can run that. You say, well, that's my unconscious. Right. They can hack into that if you let them have access to it. I think last night they had hacked into it somehow. I'm like, this is a weird dream and doesn't make me happy. And so it was fine. I just went to Jesus when I woke up and he dehypnotized me. All right. Naturally, you won't be able to use my friend John or Frank or Barbara technique over and over on the same subject. Instead, you can branch out into other forms of storytelling called hypnotic lectures. I think I do a lot of hypnotic lectures. Are you asleep yet? These can be either direct or indirect. Direct. This involves telling stories that allow people to have an experience. I like that. Stories about figures from history or literature. Stories that already have a natural trance theme embedded in them. You'll see people do this. I remember these good storytellers, like president of a university, who's always having to smooze people to get money. Well, out of his mouth comes these cool stories from his history. So John Locke did this, or and I don't know much about history, but I know I'm supposed to be impressed by this, and it's semi-interesting. Stories that already have a natural trance theme embedded in them, like the story of Mesmer or Oracle of Delphi or Milton Erickson. Oh, okay. So those are embedded with translate things. Or and stop me if you need to, because I'm reading, and I can't see your hand. Or the 1001 Nights, where Sheshahardi, whatever, stalls her own execution by telling gripping stories that end with a cliffhanger. The only way for her executioner to hear the rest of the story is to spare her life. And so each night, Scheherazade finishes one tale and starts another, always leaving her audience wanting more. Sound familiar?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting.
Okay.
Well, go
Oh, go
ahead.
ahead if you have anything.
Well, it's interesting that as far as storytelling goes. So, um, how much more of that is there? Because I haven't thought about that. Can I interject, or
Oh,
should I
yeah, do.
wait?
I'm just going to talk about the indirect. That was the direct method, but go ahead. Yeah.
So,
Comment.
so this is really fascinating because I've been studying stories for a long time, and so I would almost say like I'm going to create my own terms on the fly here to
Sure.
describe a couple things. And one term would be that I think that there's stories that are they're not true. Now I don't mean like true like it really happened, but they're untrue to a particular spirit of storytelling. Then there's another type of storytelling, which is true. Um, and it's and people who write stories, who studied story structure, could probably talk a little bit about this. Although what's funny is that so many of the movies that are coming out nowadays are not true stories. They're not in the sense that they're not true like they did, because all of them are fiction, but um, using these techniques you're talking about, it's how do I put it? It's like there are stories which use devices to create an effect upon the audience for
Yeah,
the sake of creating an effect upon the audience.
yeah, they're manipulative, that they could have a
Yes.
rousing crescendo, and it's really not called for, but guess what it does? It makes them cry.
Yeah.
You're like, whoa, I didn't even cry at my dad's funeral, and here I am crying. What? They hijacked your feeling. I did cry at my dad's funeral, but not much. I was happy for him. So anyhow, yeah, go ahead.
Now, on the other hand, so the good stories are stories which it's like they have those elements, like they'll make you cry, or they'll get you excited and make you laugh, or they'll make they'll be exciting, like action, but it's all in the service of the story itself. It's like there's a story that wants to be told, and I think most people probably listening to this know like the difference, because like I know for myself, when I go to one of the former, I feel almost dirty when I walk out of the theater. I feel like I've kind of been like violated in some way. It's like, because like I know for me, when I sit down to write a poem, like I'll sit down with a certain idea of what I want to say, and it's not even an idea, it's more like a feeling.
Yeah,
I sit down and I have a feeling of what I'm going to write, and then I'll discover as I begin to write the poem, it it has its own idea.
right.
And the creation of the poem is it's like a mother and father. Like maybe I'm the father and the story is the mother, and together we make something. And it oftentimes, like I'll start out going, and then it'll end someplace that I didn't even expect, and I love that because I learned something
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that I didn't know when I started the poem.
yeah,
And it's the same way with the story. Like any good author, like if they're just throwing together a story like a Frankenstein monster, it's like, hey, we need an arm. Send that guy back out to the cemetery, would you? We need an arm.
right.
Oh, this head's missing an eye. Would you go get me an eye? It's like, and that's the way bad storytelling is it's
Yeah,
just,
we
it's
need more F words in here because of our audience is 13-year-olds or
yes,
whatever. We need a little bit of more cleavage. Can you give us some more cleavage? You're like, what does that have to do with the
yeah,
story? Everything and
nothing,
nothing. Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. So
So
anyway, go ahead.
yep.
Sorry.
All right. So the indirect method, this involves distancing yourself from the story entirely. You tell it as if it's a story you read about or saw on TV or found in a report or watched on a film. Because it's not your story, but someone else's, it absolves you from any responsibility. This is particularly useful if your audience is skeptical in any way, either about the hypnosis or about the subject you're presenting. So you could tell a story about a stranger fallen by the wayside. I'm interjecting this, of course, who was passed by,
Yeah.
but it was a Samaritan, his enemy, that picked him up. True story, didn't happen to you, but anyhow. Number two, irresistible introduction. Your own performing monkey. Want to take the perfect subject with you everywhere you go? That's what performers did in the old days. To others, it appeared that they were choosing people from the audience at random. In fact, those people were being paid to travel around with the performer. If you looked, you'd find them in every show, sprinkled in among the crowd. And once people saw them being influenced, being put into a trance, it reinforced their belief in the hypnotist. So yeah, there you go. Bahram you, to your tribe be true. It made it easier for him to hypnotize other members of the audience. Why? Because while he was putting his planted subjects into a trance, the trance state affected other members of the audience too. But doing the same thing these days is impractical. Paying people to follow you around from one show to another can get expensive, and it might even lead to the charge of fraud or misconduct. So instead, why not use the next best thing, yourself? Simply describe what it feels like when you go into a trance, but change from the first person to the second person. It will sound like you're talking about somebody else. The way their body relaxes, the way their breathing slows down, the quiet and serenity they feel inside. When in fact, you're simply describing your own experience entering a trance. And unless they're made of stone, your subject will find themselves doing the very same thing. Their breath and other things will be affected, being pulled irresistibly into an induction without even being aware of it. Um, Hypnotic magic moments, accessing the unconscious mind. A magic moment uses a different method. It grabs your subject's attention. It arrests them, it amazes them or amuses them in the same way that magic trick would do. But it's not just a trick for the sake of it. There has to be a point behind it so that it's meaningful to your subject. So think about how God does this to us. He does. God surprises me. It can be visual, as in something you draw, auditory, maybe a song, as in the form of a story, or kinetics, as a physical demonstration. For instance, you might ask your subject to stand up and try to stretch their arms around their body as far as they can go. At some point, they'll be unable to stretch any further. Then get close to their eyes and visualize themselves stretching without actually physically moving. Finally, have them open their eyes and do the exercise for real once more. Because they've gone through the experience in their mind, they'll discover that they're able to reach further than they did on the first attempt. At this point, you talk about the power of the mind, how it magically made their body more flexible, how they can use it to be more flexible when it comes to fulfilling their goals and dreams. And that can lead you straight into the hypnotic blitz. So Jonathan, before I move on to the last 2 points, I'll say that like these points, you can see like they can be used by God, they can be used by the devil. And that's when I looked at this script here that this guy had written, I thought, yeah, a lot of these things, that's what Jesus does to me. And he will. Jesus, how he gets us converted ultimately is he gives us experiences. Well, if you go out to the best advertisers, who I'd kind of say they're kind of on the devil's side, having you buy things you don't need and so forth, guess what they'll try to do? They'll try to give the customer an experience. So they're not just selling you a car, they're selling you an experience. And so it can put you kind of into a trance, but doing stuff like that maybe is against your better judgment. Like, I don't know that I really can afford this car. So on my salary, you're saying I can buy the home? No, imagine yourself in this home. Can you see you're greeting some people? Do you see how they'll look at this? You are going to be the cat's meow. And oh, did I mention that Rob Lowe used to own that house over there? And this house was his best friend. Ooh, now I'm in a trance-like state. Go ahead.
Well, that's fascinating because you read a scripture earlier that talked about how the gracious building. Well, I don't know if it's in scripture, but it says it's like it's built on sand. And that's what I see in the world, is that so many of the philosophies, they have some truth in them, but they're built on sand, in the sense that it's like, well, you can imagine yourself making $1 million and then earn $1 million. Yes, you can. And there's people who do it. Um, but it's built on the sand. It's like, does it always work? No. Are there other factors? Yes. It's like, uh, like I remember, okay, so this is interesting. So I had a friend who had been raised a Mormon, and then now he was a Christian. He didn't consider himself a Mormon anymore. And he had kind of renounced his earlier faith, but he's a really good guy. I mean, I didn't have anything wrong with him. I think he had reasons why he went the direction he did, and I respect that. Point being is that he was a Christian, and so he read the Bible a lot, and he didn't, read the scriptures. He, like the Book of Mormon, things like that he was raised with. And we were talking about Bibles for some reason. I don't remember why, but he said how he had a friend who sold Bibles for a living, and Bible paraphernalia and Christian paraphernalia, crosses, things like that. And he had a little stand he would set up. So what he would do is he would go around to multi-level marketing conferences, okay? And he would set up his stand outside of the multi-level marketing conference. And these people would go into the multi-level marketing conference, get put into a trance,
Oh,
right?
yeah, right.
You're gonna, we're going to the stars, and all you gotta do is sign up 3 people, and then you'll get 3 people under each of them, and we're just gonna help you out. You don't even really have to do any work at all. And you're gonna have all this money, and then you'll get this diamond level, and then you'll have a car and all this. It's great, but you're rich. And he says these people would literally come out on their breaks of these kind, and there would be these vendors, and he sold Bibles. And they would come out, and my friend, like, this guy would hire him now and then to go help him sell Bibles. And he said the people would come in flocks.
Oh, yeah, because they
Yeah,
would
yeah,
all,
I'll buy a Bible,
yeah.
and they'd buy all this, and they couldn't take the money fast enough. It was just like, oh yeah, which one? Okay, because they come out wanting to spend their money, all the
Yeah,
money they hadn't earned yet. So it's like it's built on the sand. But it's like the cool thing about Christ, what I love, I'll just say this last thing and then I'll let you give it back, is that it's like, I love how Christ's model takes you low first.
yes,
It's like, he doesn't do this thing where it's like, oh, you're going to be rich, you're going to be rich. And he's like, no, no, plan on being super poor.
yes,
Live in a van, go to the homeless shelter, like, live in your, live with your relatives on the piece of property that you don't own. Do all these things, get super low. And then, like, if good things come and you do have a little extra money, you're not in this false hypnosis where you do things that are harmful to your own financial and emotional well-being.
yeah, and that's where he's taking, thankfully, all of America and the world very soon. I don't know if it's 2023,
Oh,
2024. We're all going to get a chance. But there'll be hypnotizers out there. So when you mention that, there's going to be advertisers, the World Health Organization, and so forth, and probably UN. I don't know, but there'll always be somebody, some hucksters, trying to keep the trainer rolling, because until Jesus comes, they'll always be trying to do that. So yeah, because when you're mentioning that guy, I was thinking about where you give people an experience. Go to Disneyland, you set up an experience, and you want to capture it, so you take pictures of them. And you'll spend a bunch of money on things, trinkets and so forth. I won't go down that road very far, but hypnotic blitz, overload the mind with positive suggestions. Rather than letting the magic moment just come and go, here's your chance to build on it. It's a bit like giving your subject a pep talk, telling them about how they've accessed their own unconscious mind and used it to expand their potential, using only the power of their mind, making their body stretch further than they thought it could. And if they can do that, what else might they be able to achieve? And so I'm going to just pause there and say, it's not hard to see, like when I go to church, these same concepts are being talked about in a different way, like a spiritual way, trusting in God. And that's why I have a Jesus world. My Jesus world, I can guarantee you, it's not going to just like have hypnotism throughout it or these kind of examples, but it's going to have a parallel, and so that I can remind myself, here's some things, Greg, that you're immersed in that you want to take advantage of, just like Jesus does, like what he's doing with Mark Zuckerberg, building this metaverse. Jesus doesn't want me to go, and so many people, Christians as well, will start building worlds in the metaverse. They'll start inhabiting that in whatever form. I don't know that it's going to be Mark Zuckerberg's. He's dumped 15 billion, but it's coming. It's like getting on the internet. And I can't tell you where, because it's really going to be just an extension of the internet. We already have the metaverse. It's called the internet, and you and I are using it right now. And so there's many different channels and so forth. But Jesus says, yeah, you're going to build, but you're going to build in Jesus land. So he'll have a different language for me, a different place to build, a different focus, if you will. Because if I go to Disneyland, then I would expect to be focused on Disney characters, not like LDS characters or even Jesus characters. It's not Christmas and the manger scene. I wouldn't expect that at all. I haven't been to Disneyland for a long time. I would expect Goofy, Minnie Mouse. That's their world. And it's a beautiful, imaginative world that kind of hooked right into Mickey Mouse. He was like the ultimate little icon, and they play it up, and that's fine. To each their own. But my intent is to be mesmerized. Some people wouldn't like that word. That's fine. I like it. Mesmerized, hypnotized. What I like is to be woken up to a new world that Jesus is building with me. So that's my story with Jesus. Jesus says there's going to be this new place, and he likes to call it Zion or early Zion, where everybody's going to be living together, kumbaya like. He doesn't say kumbaya, but he says in love and peace. And these people will have, they'll bear one another's burdens and so forth. So I'm invited, even at church when I go on Sunday, to believe in such things. And it's like, that's why I can believe, is because I've been hearing that my whole life. Zion, and they'll talk about pioneers and how they had that vision, and that we need to see ourselves like pioneers. What are you trying to do? Hypnotize me to think I'm a pioneer? Yes, it worked. I am a pioneer. I've decided, when I hear Jesus, he goes, you're a pioneer. You're pioneering some new ways. And one of those is Jesus TV. Well, that's a little hard for people to say. Well, I think you guys are just on Facebook or YouTube. I don't think this is a Jesus TV television station. Oh, that's fine. Maybe I've been put in a trance by Jesus to believe that I have this reality where Jesus is building a culture, and he will have Jesus TV where other people might have MTV or CNN, that he's like going to build a different world. Render to Caesar's what's Caesar's. So that's what I believe. And he's been reinforcing that belief, because I wasn't planning on having you till this morning, Jonathan. I was like, oh, we'll have Jonathan later. He goes, nope, call Jonathan right now, because he bosses Jesus TV. I'm like, so like a good employee, I'm like, okay, whatever. And I was happy to it. Like, oh, good, Jonathan's there. But that's creating this world. Let's see. Okay. The hypnotic blitz. We already covered that. The fifth one, the last one, the dream machine. Ooh, I like machine. I haven't read this, by the way. A different approach to the PCAT formula. You've probably heard about PCAT formula by now. Here's what it means. P is for the problem, C is for critical factor bypass, A is for accessing resources, and T is for transform. So you discover the problem, then you bypass the critical factor, take the subject in a different direction to put the problem on hold just for a short time. Next, access their own inner resources, try to evoke a powerful emotional response that will help them make whatever change is necessary. Finally, transform the situation by applying these resources to the original problem. If the idea of a formula seems too rigid to work with, PCAT might be more successful when applied to the guise of another vehicle, like Dream Machine or Jesus World or whatever you want to do. People are fascinated by dreams and dreaming and by alternative realities and so forth. I'm improvising here, And the more bizarre, the better. They don't want to hear about nice dreams or pleasant dreams or dreams where everything turned out happily ever after. That stuff's so boring. What they want is this weird, this unexplained, this out of the ordinary dream, UFOs and the like. The beauty of a dream is that anything can happen. You're at Disneyland, anything can happen. You're at Vegas, woo, anything can happen. And what happens stays here. Anything is possible in a dream. So no one will bat an eyelid. Whew, sounds like the devil. No matter how unbelievable your dream is. So the next time someone presents you with a problem, tell them that reminds you of a dream you once had. Then use the vehicle of the dream to elaborate on the problem. Immediately, they stop focusing on the problem and start focusing instead on your dream. Make it as bizarre and fascinating as you want to. Access the resources you use to deal with the problem in your dream. Once you've done that, you'll be changing the way your subject feels. Change the way they feel, and you'll change the way they think and behave, which results in transforming the problem, the whole object behind the exercise. Conclusion: you can use any of all of these techniques in whatever order you wish. Their power lies in the ability to create a disassociation between the conscious and unconscious minds. This helps you separate experiences out so you're able to do something with them. But what's really cool is this: you can do all of this just by talking, just by holding what seems to be an ordinary conversation, giving you the power to talk the unconscious mind directly, to talk to the unconscious mind directly. So I think of God saying, in the beginning was the word. You know what the devil would say? In the beginning was the word. Let me tell you a little story about beer and how happy it makes you, or casual sex, or so these are called secret combinations when the devil uses them, I guess, in the scriptures. He just tells you a story, a new way to think about things so that you can bypass that guilt, at least for a while, till Jesus lights that up. Okay, so that's that part of the episode. Any thoughts before we go back to the last parts?
I have kind of a thought about hypnosis in general. What do we have left? What's left on the agenda?
Yeah, let me tell you. Just a mashup of ideas. So this one's going to be a kind of a messy episode. So just be a mashup of ideas. So there's not a dehypnotize is kind of the theme, but then there's certain thoughts that we'll talk about. Maybe
Well,
10 different thoughts. Yeah.
Let me throw something that came together in my mind as you were talking, and
please do.
It's a good I think it's maybe a good explanation. I don't know explanation, but it's
let me, before you do, I'll just say my own feeling about what I read. It sounded very manipulative. It's like, this doesn't sit very well with this isn't somewhere Jesus took me, and I feel comfortable about having it on this episode. And I like how it puts my mind like, can you see how this could be used bad? Yeah. Do you see how it could be used good? Do you see? And so it's something I'll have to study more, but Jesus wants me to be aware of the things that he's doing to me have an opposition that the devil's going to use similar tools, because that's what the devil does. The devil's not really good at being creative. That's what God does. He's a creator. So, but what the devil does is what China does, their economy's been booming because they just
hijack it.
Yeah, they just copy everything, and then sometimes they make improvements to it. Devil does. Right. He's all about misery. And so so don't be surprised if some of the things, the techniques that Jesus uses are like hypnosis, even evil hypnosis, because Jesus, the devil's not the only one that wants to give you rest. He wants you to put you to sleep, to be numb. Jesus wants a different kind of numbness that's that he would rather, I think, call wake you up so that you can be at peace. So the devil offers a peace, but it's not long lasting. But anybody who gets drunk, who has a lot of stress, can say, there's a peace in that. And the alcoholics are people who they've got stuck on that particular piece. And so anyhow, that's, I'm always aware of, like, they're different fruits. They have different thresholds, different invitations. And we're down here to test them and say, I see why people eat that fruit of the devil. But here's the thing I found. And then they can testify, it runs out, that your body's satiated and then it's actually hurt. And that's what parasite. Initially, you might like, woo, I like this evil friend I have because he's fun and he's meeting certain needs. But at some point, he starts crowding in your life. The next thing you know, you're not married because you and he went on a rampage and a sinful rampage, and you found out that everything, like he said, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. No, it doesn't. That your conscious follows you, and you're freaking conscious.
Yeah.
You wake up every day, and here's this woman that's been treating you nice and taking care of your kids, and you're feeling really crappy, so crappy you can't help but just tell her what happened in Vegas. And so it didn't stay in Vegas, and that's, you're now on a pathway of redemption where God's going to have you be born again, and you have no interest in going to Vegas anymore. It's distasteful. And you realize it really wasn't that tasteful. You were telling yourself a freaking story and you got yourself hypnotized.
Yeah.
Anybody who's gone down the path of sin knows about being hypnotized, which I have. I'm a dirty, filthy, rotten, hard, hopeful sinner. Go ahead, John.
Well, that feeds into what I was going to say, and what occurred to me was that uh, so having an altered state of consciousness really helps you to do things that you wouldn't normally do. That's what occurred to me, and so like the hypnosis, like the hypnotist who helps somebody to stop smoking, they're trying to do something that they wouldn't in their normal state of mind do, and so what occurred to me was that there are two spirits, and sometimes we mistake the tool for the spirit behind the tool. It's like I can do the same thing with two different spirits.
Yeah.
And the devil's in the details. And so what I was going to say, what occurred to me was that so there's a good spirit, right, which is the Holy Spirit.
Yep.
And we have a sense of the Holy Spirit being one. It's like there is one spirit which incites us to do what is good, and it is pervasive in all things and through all things. So there is a good spirit which desires the best for the whole. And as we follow it, it leads us to a more God-filled life. Having a more God-filled life, it keeps us from falling prey to predators, okay, to spiritual predators. So the idea is that while this spirit is with me, I'm going to be less likely to do things in Vegas that I want to leave in Vegas,
Yes, right.
And then there's the bad spirit. So and the idea here again is well, let me say this, and then I'll give the example. So the bad spirit, it's like it wants us to, so the good spirits wants us to do things we wouldn't normally do, like quit smoking, like do that thing that we know is right, even though we're having peer pressure not to, or even do things that we don't completely understand, but we know comes from the good spirit and that is going to lead to our good because we know it's coming from the good spirit. Okay, so then there's the bad spirit, which is predatorial, and like this goes back to your title, your first title, which is it's parasitic.
Yeah.
Okay, so the idea is it has its own agenda. It's like the guy who wants to sell you something, but he's not concerned about whether that's good for your finances this month, or whether you're going to make the rent, or whether you're going to be able to buy food tomorrow. He is only interested, he's parasitic, and he wants to hypnotize you, put you into an altered state so you'll do something you wouldn't normally do, like buy that Bible that you don't need because you already got a Bible. Like he wants you to do that thing you wouldn't normally do. He wants you to spend the money to play into the hands of the predator with sex or drugs or whatever. I've read near-death experiences where they see, like, there's the guy looking at pornography, and then all of a sudden he opens up and a bunch of evil spirits jump inside him.
Yeah.
Same with alcohol. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, and so that evil spirit, what they're often trying to do is just double down. See, the truth is we are in, that was the first premise. We are in an altered state. We are not in heaven. We were born into a lower kingdom that God has created. And what is available is an approximation of a higher kingdom. And so you could actually access even lower kingdoms, like approximations of the devil's kingdom here. And we are building out right now. So U.S. Antichrist, all is well in Zion, Babylon cult culture is actually starting to manifest a darker kingdom where you just do what's normal, and you're going to find yourself in an alternative reality. Well, you say, well, what's the other alternative? Right. It's what maybe your grandparents had. And you go like, oh, we're in an altered state and it's normal. And to get along and not have people think you're a freak, you've got to stay in this altered state. And so it's kind of a relative term, but that's why dehypnotizing is like, because not only does God want to bring you into an alternative reality, his reality, but the devils, they've kind of got the upper hand right now. If you just flow with whatever's normal on this world, you're flowing lower and lower, and it's an alternative reality. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Well, and it kind of sounds like too, like, so it's the idea is to get you to do something you normally wouldn't do. God wants you to do things you normally wouldn't do. The devil wants you to do things. So the devil wants you to do things you normally wouldn't do to his own benefit.
Yeah.
You know, so does the car salesman. So does, you know, because they're under the spirit of the devil, which is the spirit of the self. I want to do everything for myself.
Yes.
So get you to do something you normally wouldn't do. God wants you to do something you normally wouldn't do, but unto finding yourself. So I wanted to give just a short example, and that is like of the good side, and that is, you know, that's why we're not talking about like going into some other person for hypnosis. In fact, what we're talking about is the idea of coming out of that. Like, people are doing all sorts of things right now that they normally wouldn't do. It's like they're wearing masks and they wouldn't normally wear masks. They're, you know, doing all sorts of stuff like that. But God wants you to, so okay, so here's God. So I'll give an example. So like when I was 38, I had an experience, and it well, there was many experiences that happened around that time, but I was driving a car that wasn't registered, and but God kept telling me to get up and go to work, and I couldn't afford to get it registered because there was some repairs that had to be done. Long story short, so I got like several tickets all in 1 year, but they were all in different places for not being registered. And like, but he kept saying, get up and go to work, get up and go to work, you know? And so I kept doing it. I was 38 years old. And finally I had an impression. And see, so what was my altered state doing? It was getting me to do something I normally wouldn't do. Now, this doesn't mean that the next guy is supposed to go out and drive an unregistered vehicle.
Right.
But for me, it was something I was supposed to do. And so then finally, at the end of the year, like I had an impression to go take a camping trip, and I took this camping trip. And just before I got to the place I was going to go, I get pulled over again. And the guy, like, he can tell I'm kind of upset because I was trying to figure out how to support my family. And I start crying as I'm talking to the police officer. And I said, look, I'm just camping. He thinks I'm going to commit suicide.
Oh, right.
And he starts telling me, you go home. You need to go home to your family. And the spirit, you know, like God, I'm in an altered state, right?
Right.
And God's saying, no, here's where you're supposed to be. And I'm like, okay, well, can you just take care of the cop? So he gives me the biggest ticket I've ever had, you know, and then I go to the camping trip. And so I'm doing something I normally wouldn't do. And I go on the camping trip and I pray, and I'm like, what, God, what can I do that will support my family? And basically through that experience, I had an impression that maybe I should write. And then I get done with that weekend and I'm heading back, and I have another impression to go to this conference. And it's a conference I wouldn't normally go to, you know? And I go to this conference, I'll make it all short, but basically I think I had $72, and I go and I spend 68 to get into the conference. The same conference would probably cost 150 now. And I go to the conference, and through that whole experience, I had never once in my life considered the idea that I should write. And, you know, the few people who know my writing, you and a few others have said to me, how grateful you are that I write, because
Yeah,
God has used that as an instrument to be able to say certain things.
that's right.
And so I had to be seeking God in such a way that I was willing to do things that I normally wouldn't do. And what is God trying to do? He's trying to draw us into relationship with him in such a way that we will do things that we wouldn't normally do, so he can lead us out
Yes,
of this world where we're being preyed upon,
yes,
where we're being
yeah,
opened up to all sorts of spirits that are using us in a wicked way. And to do that, the only way he can get us out of that is to alter our consciousness, to have us start. And for a little while, it's like we just look crazy to everybody because we're not doing everything that everybody else is doing. They're saying, well, if you don't do everything that, and it's like, so wait a minute. To participate in this world that we live in, I have to allow people to prey upon me. That's the way I feel when I go to so many, like I go to look for a movie now, and
yeah,
it's like, there's nothing good. And it's like, so wait a second. If I want to not buy into this world and where it's going, so you're telling me that I'm evil. And it's like, that's where we're at today. Is I think you're going to find, I'll wrap it up, but I think you'll find more and more people who are going to come out,
yeah,
and they're going to like get into a place where it's like the world's going to be telling them you're crazy, and they're going to be like, I don't care,
yeah,
because that looks crazy to me.
yeah,
And
that's right. Yeah,
like me with my writing, it's like it sure isn't making me much money like people paying me directly right now, but it's like, but I have this sense I write and God pays me.
yeah,
And it's like because I am in an altered state of consciousness where I actually believe that he provides for me.
yeah. And he has said clearly in scriptures that that's what it's based on. Believe in Christ, and that's when he can move, because he can move when he wants to, but he's somewhat limited by his word, because he says you have to believe in order to get certain amounts of gifts or certain amount of spirit to be filled with his spirit. You have to have a broken heart, contrite spirit, and then you become movable, or what would be called a soft heart. And because he describes his ways as straight and narrow, and so what that implies is that's not our ways. Man's ways are, so what ours is are twisted. So if you're going to get straight, let's suppose that you're a twisted hose. Is God going to have to twist you differently, or can you just be a normal hose all over the board? No, he's a straight arrow. And so what's that going to feel like? Well, it's going to feel like he's going to take you in directions that maybe your parents weren't, maybe your grandparents, because you came from a twisted society where it seemed right, but it
And that will
wasn't.
seem twisted to
Yeah,
us.
and so it'll seem like you're being twisted, and others will accuse you of, and you literally are. So if you have a twisted hose, guess what you're going to do to get that hose straight? You're going to twist it, and not just the hose. Your mind, your heart are going to get twisted. But what's the direction they're getting twisted? Well, the person in this parable is Jesus. He's the one that's going to untwist you. You surrender, like, okay, get me straight, and it might take some time. And so one of the twisting he might do looks counterproductive. You're like, I think it's getting worse, but you got some knots. So if anybody's ever untwisted rope or hoses that gets knots, you're doing some serious movement of that thing away from its natural state. I was just sitting there minding my own business, just like a twisted hose or a twisted rope. And then I said, Jesus, take me. And he started doing stuff that was weird and unholy. Next thing I know, I'm talking about hypnosis. Now, Jesus, you're hypnotizing me. Well, why am I talking about that? And then he goes, that's a good question. Why don't you go on Jesus TV and try to explain it? So here we go on to this next part of the episode. Jesus told me that within the traditional religious language, the heart is a symbol for the unconscious. We already talked about that. And I'll skip this part. Care for the soul. Blah, blah. Yeah, we've covered that, so that's good. And this is more of that I've talked about, so I'm gonna let that go. And I say that's all I'll lead up to this explanation. Jesus gave me an explanation when I did hashtag hear him he gave me an explanation of why we're doing this WakeNOsis, or this symbiotic spirit possession, or this dehypnotizing. Same. This particular episode, part 2, is called Symbiotic Spirit Possession. That's probably a new term for you. I know it is for me. I didn't Google that term. Instead, I did #HearHim. Of course, when I say that, I'm actually referencing my favorite prophecy that President Russell M. Nelson received from Jesus. He said, when the Father comes, he introduces his Son. And that's what you should expect. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but basically Jesus is the one that talks to us. So #HearHim, #follow him. That's speaking of Jesus. And so when I say I didn't Google it, I did #hear it, or Jesus it. So instead of Google it, how about you Jesus it? So that's what I do. And so I'm saying this term, symbiotic spirit possession, you're probably not going to be able to Google it. I haven't Googled it yet, but if you Googled it, I doubt if you'd find this, those 3 words meaning what we're doing here. Again, Google search is an advanced technology in Babylon. You're familiar with it. #HearHim is what's called advanced leapfrog technology. In other words, it leaps beyond what Google can do. #HearHim is light years ahead of any search you could ever do on Google search. Now keep this in mind, Jesus might have us use Google search. So he has me use Google search often. But before Google search, I get my search directions from Jesus and a lot of my answers from him. So that symbiotic spirit possession, yeah, I had to hear him to even know, what are you talking about? And I say, if you don't believe me, try it. #HearHim, you'll see. #HearHim works differently than Google search. So let's see. This is how I came up with symbiotic spirit possession. So here we go. Let me tell you just briefly, this whole thing, this hypnosis, WakeNOsis, symbiotic spirit possession, dehypnotizing, it all relates to some world building that I'm doing. So I'm building a Jesus world with Jesus. And at the very first part of that, when you go to www.getmorejesus, that website's for me. It's not necessarily for other people, but people can go there. They say, what's Greg up to? And that's how it'll be, that we'll start building our worlds, world builders will. And I think people will be led just to build them. So when you go to Disneyland, they don't have this big thing explaining what Disneyland is. You just step into the experience, and maybe you've never watched Mickey Mouse. Everybody else kind of knows what's going on, and what's that dog doing? Oh, his name's Goofy. And so you may experience him differently. So when you go to my Jesus Greg world, it might be a different experience than it is for me. But you need to understand, like Walt Disney, well, this is what I want to see there. And this is what Jesus, I say, Jesus, what do you want my mind to see every day? And he wants me to see, one of the things he wants me to see is this understanding that these projects he's having me work on, intensive projects, including Jesus TV, Jesus Radio, Jesus Hospital, Jesus Marketplace, they're all intended to retrain my heart and mind. So we talked about getting into a trance, if you will. It's a new story. And so that's ultimately what was motivating me. I had a placeholder at what's called the gate. So the gate of a world is like the gate of it. That has a scriptural meaning. I don't think I'll go into that, but basically you'll see that in ancient Hebrew and other cultures, the gate is a very important part of like the entrance to a city or a land. And that's what I've found. And I've found that Jesus keeps having me edit the gate, edit. And that's repetitious. If I'm doing something repetitiously, I'm like, 2 things. 1, it's changing, but 2, it's repetitious. So I'm learning. And once again, it's kind of like a meditative thing, this repetitious thing, but it also is like I'm being programmed as it would be a trance, or I'm being reprogrammed. So that's where this comes from. We want to start this episode by worshiping and praising our dear Savior for his infinite grace, which is, in part, manifest here today in a newly revealed religious spiritual language, not yet a language used by formal LDS or otherwise, which is fine. It's not canonized, if you will. And this just goes on. I'm going to kind of skip this part, but what it is an acknowledgement that is God is emphasizing to me, Jonathan, is that Jesus, his grace is great, and I'm now experiencing what that means. It's accommodations. He will make special accommodations to get us close to him. So if you say, no way I'm going big on Jesus unless he does this, well, as long as it's a holy thing, he might do it. Like if he can't like classic rock music, then I can't be his friend. Well, I didn't ask that of Jesus, but guess what? He likes classic rock music with me anyways. And you could say, well, that's just because you're such a hard-hearted, hopeful sinner. If you did what Jesus wants to do, you'd be just listening to the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, or whatever they call it, the Tabernacle Choir, because that's what Jesus's favorite music is. I'm like, okay, in your world, but I happen to know if anybody likes rock music generally or classic rock, they know there's something in some of those songs that's lovely, good report or praiseworthy. And we know where everything that's lovely, good report or praiseworthy comes from. It's Jesus. So that means Jesus helped them. His spirit, at least for a little while, possessed these musicians, or another term, he gave them gifts. He gave them musical gifts, and they did. And so some of the things they sing about are lovely and good report and praiseworthy. So he makes these accommodations. So I'm just going to go through a list of accommodations. So this is kind of like a side panel, but I think he's going to wrap it in. Jesus gives these kind of accommodations, different versions of the Bible. Now, I grew up in LDS land, Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints land, and the official church version is King James Version. But I've looked at other versions like, oh, I can see why people would like that. Because sometimes the interpretation's hard, Old English. And so is that Jesus providing other versions, or is that the devil? Well, you can go ahead and make your own decision, but that's my Jesus who says, no, Greg, some people are going to do better with a different translation. They'll understand this better. And I'm willing to suffer it. So Jesus suffers things. He probably has his preference, and he may lead me eventually to new words and so forth, but he's patient. He's long suffering. Like, okay, if that's what you want to do, Greg, we'll sing some classic rock songs. And he won't just do it like a little bit. He'll happily do it. And I'll hear him singing. I'll hear him inside me and like, Jesus likes this. So I'm like a little kid. Ooh, you like this, don't you, Jesus? But other people's experience, like, no, he doesn't like rock music. Well, the same thing with King James. Jesus only likes King James. Well, that's kind of arrogant, I'd say. It's not humble. It's like, how do you know? Did you ask him? Yeah, okay. And did you ask him for everybody? Because if you're asking him for everybody, that doesn't even fit within the framework, because Jesus has an individual relationship with everybody. And different churches, different gifts. He gives people different gifts because he knows that's what they'll appreciate. That's what they're supposed to have. He'll make accommodations. So he's given me certain gifts that are necessary for what I need to do, for who I'm married to. He gives different spouses. So he didn't give my spouse to somebody else because he knew there's a unique person that Greg needs, and vice versa. He gives specific children. My dad needed 2 wives, okay? And he got 2 wives. One had to die. Now he's sealed to both, but that's an interesting variance that Joseph Smith had and Brigham Young had and other people have. It's not what he says, oh, I'm going to make that accommodation because I don't desire it. And also he doesn't desire it for me at this point. Different life experiences. So sometimes he's like, man, this person, I'm going to accommodate them because the only way that I can get them to learn the lessons or even like me is I've got to give them a lot of money. Well, do you have to give Greg money to like you? Nope. But I do have to make him uncomfortable. When he's uncomfortable, he'll cry out to me. And so, let's see, other things. He gives accommodations in how he speaks to people. And he There's some people that they want to look up at the stars and have him talk to them through the stars and the moon and the sun. And we all shine on like the moon and the stars and the sun. Yeah, so that's John Lennon. And so John Lennon would find some light and truth, maybe poetically, and other people, moon, stars, sun, they're just planets up there, and they're pretty, you know, and all, but they're not trying to communicate. So he accommodates different ways his children talk with him. Word of wisdom. Some people need alternative medicine. Some people wouldn't touch alternative medicine. Some people would die without alternative medicine. So they're eating all kinds of herbs that they believe Jesus is telling them, which I have no doubt he's right. And they're saying no to this. Oh, I can't eat any of this. I'm a vegan or whatever. And so Jesus accommodates that. And he's probably even, he says he gives unto us weaknesses that'll humble us. So he sometimes sets our bodies up. So we have to have that accommodation or we cannot live. And so Jonathan and I both have to have certain accommodations because there's certain things we can't do or we will die. Our spirits will die and probably our bodies will die as well. So the kind of stuff that we do, it's an accommodation, and Jesus tolerates it. And sometimes he purposes it, not just permits it, but he purposes it. All right. I got many more, but I'm just going to jump to the next thing that Jesus brought into my life with this, because there's many things that are going on with this hypnosis, WakeNOsis TV program that I just got kind of scattered notes. But so how he talks to me, sometimes in movies. The other night on Sunday, he said, watch this one, Conversations with God. And people always tell me, Greg, you got to read the book, Conversations with God. And I know, because what I just taught to you about is related to what I've just said in the last few minutes, is related to that Conversations with God. God had already started talking to me before I watched that movie, that I'm talking to people all the time, Greg, and I'm talking to them with the stars, the moon, with music, with the mouth of other people. And so that's one of the premise of this Conversations with God, is that in the very circumstances of your life, Jesus is trying to say something to you. And so you could say, I spent my whole day tripping and falling and doing like this. That could be, if you're open to it, Jesus talking to you, getting your attention. There's many different ways. When I say talking, I'm talking about getting your attention, because communication involves attention. A lot of times it's not talking at all. It's showing you stuff and revealing stuff. Like the Karate Kid. The Karate Kid was waxing on, waxing off. He wasn't having these verbal instructions on how to do karate. He was instead doing these repetitive motion things that were mind numbing. He's like, I think I'm just painting this guy's fence. I think I'm just sanding this guy's floor. He's just getting free work. And the guy shows him in an instant, no, you were learning the actual movements of karate movements. Let me show you. Boom. It's called the Karate Kid moment. You can go to YouTube that. But there's how Jesus works. And it's so Jesus already had an episode called Jesus Uses Mashup Language to tell me. So that was a precursor to watching Conversations with God. And he's just introducing me to something that he wants me to build into my world. Many different ways in which I communicate with my unconscious, also another term called Jesus. I like to call him Jesus, not my unconscious, but he's in there. He's part of that. And communicate what he's telling me, and also communicate back to him. Thank you, Jesus. I will say, like on my glove, I've got to thank you, Jesus. So I look at the gloves, I kiss them, because he helped me find my gloves one day, and I wrote down the date. And what I'd say is my spirit is possessed by him, and he was writing on my gloves using a pen. That's one way to say it. It's the way I like to say it to myself. Jesus writes on my clothes, and he uses my hand to do it. Okay, so I'm introducing a lot of stuff there, Jonathan, but it's kind of where this hypnosis, WakeNOsis kind of went, is that because it's communicating with the unconscious mind. So when you are in this state, there's um, there's input, there's things that story input, and it's kind of a mashup of various things, just like an advertisement would, a combination of music, combination of images, a combination of maybe repetitiveness where they say the thing again and again. Well, this is what Jesus is doing with me. And it's like, Greg, what am I doing with you every morning and during your lunch song? It looks like something like hypnosis, Jesus. It's like you're repetitively training me and my mind. And what do you think of it, Greg? I like it. It seems to be working. I don't know why it's working. And so it's kind of like hypnosis. I don't know all the things. We kind of covered it, but it's like, I don't know what all goes. It's so complicated. The unconscious itself, so complicated. And so all we have is these rudimentary tools even to talk about it. But it's working, and he wants me to stay in the game. I think I'll be exploring it the rest of my life, is paying attention to how does God talk to me, to my unconscious self and my conscious self, and realizing, oh, if you're asking about God's communication, you're talking about a whole bunch of things, because he will accommodate you. And he already is. He's talking to it with music, with timing of things, what you call coincidence, but are really Jesus coincidences. And I'm learning to accept that. Like, okay, that's how you roll, and being humbled by it. Like, whoa, then I just have to listen because I can't understand all this. And that's what I get. Like, yeah, you're not going to be able to understand it all, nor will any human. So I like you to try and to approximate it, and then because I need you, Greg, to build these things into your Jesus Greg world, because others are going to use that as a template to build their own John, Jesus John worlds, or Jesus Aaron worlds, or Jesus Anson worlds, or Jesus Saber worlds. They will look to me because there's not a lot of people building a Jesus world, a flat out device. So that's what architects and engineers, and he wants me to understand the underlying basis. And as I do, then I start understanding the underlying basis of what we have in our culture. Like, oh, so that's what that advertisement stuff's about. They're hypnotizing us. And now I've got new language, but it's scriptural language. No, they're putting you to sleep. Oh, the sleep of hell. Well, you know what Pink Floyd called that? Well, Jesus does know, because he wrote that song with him. It's called Comfortably Numb. There is no pain, you are receding. A distant ship of smoke on the horizon. You are coming through, you're only coming through in waves. I see your lips, but I can't hear what you're saying. Altered states. And so that's what it is. It's about me accepting, understanding these things, ultimately to do my job, because I'm inserting things into this Jesus Greg world that I don't fully understand. Their import, what is important, and why are we doing this? Why is it repetitive? Why does it have to be the same song every morning? And I'm not sure it does for everybody, but for me, he's pretty insistent, at least for now. He could change it, but my whole day is going to, what I understand is my whole day is going to be full of these things, with improv, because like right now, this isn't what I do every day, but Jesus TV, more and more. And so, yeah. Okay, go ahead, Jonathan. Yeah, that was a lot.
Just that, two thoughts came together, and then one just escaped out of my brain. Give me 2 seconds.
No problem.
Yeah, so the important, the thing that occurred to me, and this might be, this may be a full circle, it's like, I think we're probably coming close to wrapping up, but
yeah, we are.
But so what we're doing when we listen is that we're following Jesus Christ. Okay, so we've thought about, like, that we want to follow Jesus. But what do we see in the Garden of Gethsemane before he goes to the cross? He says something real interesting. He says, um, let this cup pass from me. Please let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, but, in other words, but, um, not what I want, it's like, but, that's what basically you're saying, like, that's what I want,
Yeah.
but not, don't, but that's not what's important, is what he said. He
And what
says,
I
what's
want
important.
more, yeah, in other words, what I want more
Yeah.
than that.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. What I want more is what you want. So again, so Christ, there's all this, in the Bible, it talks about him going up on mountains, praying during the night, you know. So he's, and it's interesting, that guy I sent you the link for last night, he was talking about how Christ goes up onto this mountain and he takes his disciples this one time, or Peter, James, and John, and he has like this altered state, and they have an altered state. Like he starts to glow like a white fire, you know, and they start to see things that they normally don't see. So he was living in a world. And what was the point? What are we doing when we do this? Well, what we're really doing is we're trying to follow Christ, because Christ lived his life in an altered state of consciousness, which gave him the ability, whenever things were hard, to not do what he wanted to do, but to do what God in that moment was asking him to do. That's perfectly um, shown in that Garden of Gethsemane, as he says, which is fascinating too, because it shows his own mortality, because he's saying there that my will is to not do this. So his will was different than God's will, but what did he do? He submitted his will to God's will.
Yeah.
And that's different. Like that's different than even following a creed. Like yeah, we can do what this other man is telling us to do, or we can do what the leaders in our group have told us that this is supposed to be interpreted and stuff like that. But I promise you, it's like when you begin to follow the still small voice, it will lead you into a path which will strip you of everything that is not God. I
Yeah.
mean, it will lead you low so that you can come high and live with him in everyday life. And so I think that's a good culmination, and it's a different path for each of us. Like you're talking about how it's the same for you every day. And it's like, for me, like I've taken a lot of what you've said and I've incorporated it, and I start to create these regimes. What I discover is I have to come back to the regime because it's like a center place, okay, I'm gonna do this certain thing every morning. But then like my nature is such, because I'm a wanderer, it's really important that I can let go of that at a moment's notice, because I end up going on these journeys where I was recently told that you need to focus, and if you focus, you'll reach your goal next month, which my goal is to finish this book I'm writing. And so it was like, okay, I got to focus. That means I got to do nothing but this book. I got to focus on this, and it was like, and then I found out pretty fast, no, that's not what I mean by focus. What I mean is that you focus and listen.
Yeah.
So he leads me on this journey. I'm like, God, I'm not working on the book, and then through this little journey he leads me on, I came back to writing today. And I had prayed a while back. This woman talked about doing 2,000 to 10,000 words a day, 2,000 to 10,000. And I thought, that's impossible for me. Well, this little journey, this little sidetrack he took me on, I sat down and I realized, oh, I'm going to write at least 2,000 words today. Like something shifted inside through what he took me on, so that now it's like I can tell the rough draft is just going to buzz out. And now we're going into National November Write More Month. So not NaNoWriMo, they call it. And I'm like, I'm all prepared because I was willing to let him take me off of my normal. So what is each person like? I love that you say one size fits one,
Yeah. Yeah. And
and that's what we got to learn.
yeah, and that's really what I'm emphasizing to myself, um, and to others, like when they build their Jesus worlds, um, when you build something with a lot of vigor, okay, because you have a spiritual enlightenment about it, that's a strong power that can easily turn into compulsion to others. because it's like a trance-like. When you're around an evangelical just dropping J bombs, it's like working with blue collar workers who dropping F bombs. And next thing you know, you might be dropping F bombs. You're like, oh man, I'm picking up this language, and then you're like, now I'm drinking in the bars, and I'm looking at nudies and so forth. And it's like, how did I get here? Well, we like sheep, that it's natural, but even in the holy ways, you can have somebody who's compelling, like you said, about the multi-level marketing, selling Bibles out there. They can rally people up. And so it's hard to be that individual when you have something that's dynamic and unusual. So these things we've talked about, even that article, you dazzle them with some interesting thing, and they're so asleep, they're just like, give me something that's different. I don't care if it's whack. And their unconscious is, and their unconscious can be drawn to that and think, well, maybe I ought to do that. And I am like that as well, because people say, well, you ought to watch, you ought to read the book, Conversations with God. And they've said that many times, and it sounds very interesting to myself, but thy will be done, Lord, because I've given up. I don't read a book unless Jesus tells me to, but there's many interesting books that come, and I just like, no, because he has an order. I've learned to trust that God assembles this mind of mine and whatever I'm doing in a puzzle-like fashion. And so there's a lot of books. In fact, when I was doing my research this morning, he took me to this very interesting book. It's a book about self-help books, the 50 best self-help books. And so they summarize those. Oh, I want to read that book. There's a part of me, I want to read that book. Jesus goes, no, you don't need it. All the ideas you need, I'm going to give to you. That's what I hear him say. Now, maybe a year from now, he'll go, oh, read that book. The 50 best books, that's the one I wanted to read. So there's timing to everything. And so I have to trust him doing that. And that's what I want to build into my universe. So you see, that's why that's so emphasized, is because when I have people, because I'm going to be one of the first who has this Jesus world as a device. I didn't create these worlds. We already have them. What Jonathan was saying earlier in this episode, this is what Jesus says. Great, they already have them. They already have a Jesus world, whether they know it or not, even if they don't call it that. I'm in all things, through all things. They already have a world. All right. And it is the most immersive world that they'll ever have. All these crutches, these technology things, that they're useful for certain people, and I need them for me, because Jesus says, if you're ever going to get where I need you to go, you're going to have to use these tools. But he set it up so that I would have to, because he wants to bring forth, just like he wanted to bring forth the books. So he had the technology of books with the Gutenberg press. He wanted to take his children to a new level of understanding, which he did, so that the priests didn't have to be the only ones reading books, or the book readers. Everybody could immerse themselves in a new world. Well, that's what's coming. We see it with the internet, and that's just an approximation. What's coming with Web3 or whatever is a whole different level of what we already have. And so part of what I have to build into my world is this deep understanding for myself, so I can lead without compulsion. Like, hey, Jonathan, you do what you do. All right, with Jesus. I'm totally down with that. Hey, if you could do an episode, let's do that. And if Jonathan can't, I don't care. I don't care in Christ. It'd be kind of cool I like Jonathan. I love his story is so interesting. It's intriguing. It's like going to the human zoo. Ooh, look at that. And I've got a lot of friends like that. But I leave it up to Jesus, because I don't know who's supposed to be on Jesus TV. I thought it was going to be Aaron doing this episode. Nope. It was, and I'm like, okay. And I think Aaron's going to be on next, and we'll finish, because there's only a little bit left on this episode. And so when you're asking about that, like, yeah, I think we're done here. And I think Aaron, I'm going to do kind of what I did with you, just kind of rehash, see if he has any comments. So Jesus is doing something different with these episodes. So maybe I'll be like saying, hey, did you watch the episode? Let's get on and talk about that episode. So talking about the episode, I don't know. Is Jesus, I'm creating some kind of new technology that I don't know about, a new way in which TV is going to be done. Because oftentimes I'll find recently, I'm in the forefront of some of these things. So like when we started doing this Zoom thing, boy, that lit up our friend Lyman Compton. like, yeah, that's the right format. And then I could see it too, so that's, Joe Rogan's doing the same thing. You got two talking heads and you just kind of improv it, like, oh, Jesus has taken me somewhere that I couldn't have intuited. Well, I did. I intuited it because he led me there. I couldn't have come there through my conscious understandings of the world, because he didn't let me read the
Right.
50 awesome books of our age. But that's, thank you. I wanted to be able to summarize what my intent is to do what Jesus tells me to do, and understand why you have me do this. And it's because these worlds that people are going to create are going to have power. For the deep Christians, they will have power to alter your mind, which you'll need to suffer through what's coming. You might need to have some good books, some good movies. You might need to have some wheat and some extra soup and so forth in order to suffer well with you and your children. But ultimately, what I know I need is more Jesus, more of his presence. And in order to get that, I have to build a whole world of its projects and systems, and it's working. So I wouldn't do it. I'm not into things that are just like the Pythagorean theorem, not useful. Thank you. Maybe useful for some people, but not useful for me. The Pythagorean theorem has not, but everybody studies it. So we got to do it. It must be important. Not necessarily. And so that's what I want to build, a spirit within my world. When people come in there, they'll say, wow, Greg's always emphasizing that I'm supposed to do it whatever way Jesus tells me to do it. And Greg's fine with that. And Greg has been trained to that, because they'll have to train themselves too, because I wasn't always fine, super fine. Now I'm super fine. I was fine, but I've moved from good to better to best. We're like, no, I'm unqualified to tell Jonathan how to build his world, when to build his world, but I will notice things that are like very intriguing. So Jonathan had a crisis, and he had, you told me you had one of the songs on a loop. I think it was Amazing Grace or something like that. And that's like repetitive. It puts you and it helped you through. And like, oh yeah, that's what Jesus has been doing with me a lot, is repetitive things, so that it gets made into my mind. Okay, go ahead. That's the it on
Well,
that.
and that's the reason why we talk and why we write, is because we're not expecting that somebody else should follow us. That's not the idea at all.
You're right.
The idea is that, remember how we talked about how, like, we're not one thing?
Yeah.
Like, I'm a conglomerate. My mom, my dad, me, I'm autonomous, but there's also my mom comes through, my dad comes through, Jesus comes through, the devil comes through.
Yeah.
Like when I'm not careful, so it's like the idea, the reason that is that in God's world. So if you think about it, we are joint heirs. What Christ said is that we would become joint heirs. He said he would make us equal with him, which is just something that's not fathomable for us.
Right. Yeah.
It's like, no, we are going to be made equal with Christ. Well, how does that happen? It's like the redwoods. It's like every redwood tree is its own tree. It is autonomous, but the root system of the redwood forest is all interconnected. So they it's like every tree in the redwood forest is connected to every other tree by these interconnected root systems. And that's the way.
Symbiotic, right? Yeah.
It's symbiotic. Yeah. In fact, they have albino redwood trees, which have no green pine needles. And so it cannot get photosynthesis, but that it will grow for 2,000 years, just like the rest of them, but it lives and it receives its nutrients from the roots. So that, a normal tree like a fir would die because its roots are not connected like the redwoods are. And so like for us that are a part of God's kingdom, we don't understand this yet, but like when we enter into his kingdom, you don't understand. It's like this interconnectedness, this symbiotic relationship we're talking about is intensified. Like I read a few near-death experiences where they talk about this, like they go to the other side and it's like everyone's there. And it's like, and they're a part of everyone, and they can sense everyone in the kingdom. So you inherit all things. That means that it's like like you're talking one day and you say something and and your wife is like, wow, that's new. And you're like, yeah, that was actually Greg. Who's Greg? Well, he lives on the other side of God's world.
Right. Right.
But I know him. And I didn't even remember that I knew him until just now. But yeah, I know Greg and I've known him forever and he's with me all the time. That's the way God's kingdom is.
Yeah.
So that's the reason we talk, because in this world, we can't fully tap into that. So why do we talk? Why do we write? Because we're shielded and veiled. The only way for us to get these things get these things back and forth and to start the spirit moving is to talk and to write.
Yes, I like that. Yep, that
So
sounds good. All right. Well, brother, thanks. That was a long one. I kind of thought it might be, and I
okay,
appreciate you
yeah, thank you.
staying with it.
It's good.
And yeah, it's good. And we'll have more. But God bless you in the rest of your day today.
Yeah, you too.
Just a minute. Let's see. Cancel. Just a second. I got to turn off the recording. I almost hit the wrong button. Oh my goodness. Stop the